Fight response. Someone cuts you off in traffic. Before you even think, your hands tighten on the wheel. Your jaw clenches. There's a split second where you want to pull up next to them, lay on the horn, maybe even roll down the window. It's not rational. It's not strategic. But the urge is there, sharp and immediate. That's your fight response kicking in. When your brain detects a threat, it doesn't always tell you to run. Sometimes it tells you to push back. This reaction is hardwired into your nervous system. Millions of years ago, when our ancestors faced predators or rival groups, running wasn't always the best option. Sometimes the threat was unavoidable. Sometimes standing your ground was the only way to survive. So your body learned to prepare you to strike before you're struck. Adrenaline floods your system. Your muscles tense. Your focus sharpens. All of it happens before conscious thought catches up. But here's the problem. Your brain can't tell the difference between a physical threat and a social one. A condescending comment from your boss triggers the same cascade as a physical attack. An argument with your partner activates the same defensive systems designed to protect you from actual danger. Your body prepares for a fight that doesn't require fists, but the response is identical. That's why people snap over minor things. The colleague who sends a passive-aggressive email. The friend who makes a dismissive remark. The stranger who bumps into you without apologizing. None of these are life or death situations, but your nervous system doesn't care. It registers disrespect, boundary violation, perceived attack. And it responds the way it was built to, by preparing you to fight back. The fight response doesn't just show up as physical aggression. It shows up as sharp replies. Defensive arguments. The need to correct someone immediately. It shows up when you feel compelled to have the last word, when backing down feels like losing, when any criticism feels like a direct assault on your worth. It's the same mechanism, just dressed in modern clothing. And it escalates fast. Once the fight response activates, the rational part of your brain starts to shut down. Blood flow redirects to your muscles. Your vision narrows. Your thinking becomes binary. Win or lose, dominate or submit. Nuance disappears. The person in front of you stops being a person. They become the threat. That's why arguments spiral. One sharp comment leads to another. Voices get louder. Neither side backs down because backing down feels like defeat, and your nervous system was built to avoid defeat at all costs. You're not having a conversation anymore. You're in survival mode. The fight response isn't inherently bad. There are moments when it's necessary, when standing your ground protects you from real harm. But most of the time, it misfires. Most of the time, the threat isn't real. And the fight response just makes things worse. Flight response. The meeting's about to start. You realize you forgot to prepare. Your stomach drops. Your mind races through excuses. Maybe you can say you're sick. Maybe you can claim a family emergency. Anything to get out of this room before someone asks you a question you can't answer. That impulse, the one that tells you to disappear, that's your flight response. When your brain detects danger it can't fight, it switches strategies. Instead of confronting the threat, it tells you to escape. And just like the fight response, this system doesn't differentiate between physical danger and psychological discomfort. A predator chasing you triggers the same reaction as an uncomfortable social situation. The flight response evolved because sometimes survival meant getting away fast. If the threat was too big, too dangerous, too overwhelming, fighting was suicide. Running gave you a chance. Your ancestors who hesitated got killed. Your ancestors who bolted survived long enough to pass on their genes. That's why the instinct is so powerful. That's why, when it activates, it overrides logic entirely. But in modern life, most threats aren't the kind you can run from. You can't flee a difficult conversation. You can't outrun a looming deadline. You can't escape a relationship problem by physically leaving the room, at least not without consequences. But your nervous system doesn't know that. It just knows something feels wrong. And it wants you out. So the flight response adapts. Instead of running, you avoid. You procrastinate on the project that's stressing you out. You ghost the person whose expectations feel too heavy. You scroll through your phone during a tense dinner, mentally checking out even though your body's still there. It's the same escape mechanism, just reconfigured for a world where literal running isn't an option. Avoidance feels like relief in the moment. You dodged the discomfort. You bought yourself time. But the problem doesn't disappear. It waits. And while you're avoiding it, your nervous system stays activated, keeping you in a low-level state of tension that never fully resolves. The deadline still looms. The conversation still needs to happen. The anxiety doesn't fade. It just stretches out, turning acute stress into chronic unease. And here's where it compounds. Avoidance becomes a pattern. The more you flee, the more your brain learns that fleeing works. It gave you short-term relief, so next time the discomfort appears, your nervous system pushes you toward the same solution. You start avoiding smaller and smaller things. A mildly awkward conversation becomes something to dodge. A potential conflict becomes a reason to withdraw. Over time, your world shrinks. Not because the threats are getting bigger, because your tolerance for discomfort is getting smaller. People caught in chronic flight response stop engaging with life fully. They keep relationships surface level to avoid vulnerability. They turn down opportunities to avoid the risk of failure. They stay in situations they've outgrown because change feels too threatening. It's not laziness. It's not weakness. It's a survival system doing exactly what it was designed to do, protect you from perceived danger, even when that danger is just the discomfort of being seen challenged or uncertain. The flight response isn't wrong. There are real situations where removing yourself is the smartest move. But most of the time it's reacting to shadows. Most of the time, the thing you're running from isn't as dangerous as your nervous system believes. And the longer you run, the harder it becomes to stop. Freeze response. You know you should say something. The moment calls for it. Someone just made a claim that's wrong, or asked you a direct question, or put you on the spot in front of others. But nothing comes out. Your mind goes blank. Your body locks up. You just stand there, silent, while the seconds stretch into something unbearable. Later, you'll replay it. You'll think of exactly what you should have said. But in the moment, you couldn't access any of it. You froze. This is your nervous system's third option. When fighting feels impossible and fleeing isn't available, your body does the only thing left: it shuts down. The freeze response is an ancient survival mechanism. When a predator is too close to outrun and too strong to fight, playing dead becomes the last hope. Some predators lose interest in prey that doesn't move. Freezing bought our ancestors a chance, however slim, to survive. But that same response fires in situations where stillness doesn't help. A tense confrontation. A public speaking moment. A conversation that demands you set a boundary. Your nervous system registers threat, determines that fight and flight won't work, and defaults to freeze. Your muscles tense. Your breathing slows. Your mind disconnects from your body. You become a spectator in your own life, watching yourself fail to respond while feeling completely unable to intervene. The freeze response doesn't just immobilize your body. It immobilizes your thoughts. Your working memory crashes. The part of your brain responsible for speech and reasoning goes offline. You can't think clearly because your system is redirecting all resources towards survival. And in freeze mode, survival means becoming invisible. Don't move. Don't speak. Don't draw attention. It's why people go silent during confrontations, even when they desperately want to defend themselves. It's why someone might stand frozen during an assault instead of fighting back, then spend years wondering why they didn't resist. It's not weakness. It's not consent. It's a neurological response that overrides conscious control. And it leaves damage behind. Because unlike fight or flight, which discharge the energy through action, freeze traps that energy inside. Your body stays flooded with stress hormones that have nowhere to go. The tension doesn't resolve. It lingers sometimes for hours, sometimes for days, leaving you feeling drained, foggy, disconnected. Chronic freeze turns into something worse. Shutdown. Dissociation. A persistent sense of numbness where nothing feels real, including yourself. You stop engaging. You stop trying. Not because you don't care, but because your system has learned that action is dangerous and stillness is the only safe response. The freeze response isn't a choice. But recognizing it is, because once you understand that your body is running a script designed for predators, not people, you can start to interrupt it. You can learn to discharge the trapped energy. You can teach your nervous system that it's safe to move again. But first, you have to stop blaming yourself for freezing in the first place. Fawn Response. They're angry again. You don't know why, or maybe you do, but it doesn't matter. What matters is making it stop. So you apologize. You agree. You shift your tone, soften your words, reshape yourself into whatever will calm them down. It works. The tension eases. But something inside you just disappeared. This is the fawn response. The survival strategy your nervous system deploys when fighting would make things worse, running isn't possible, and freezing feels too risky. Instead of resisting the threat, you appease it. The fawn response evolved in social species where survival depended on staying in the group. If you couldn't fight the dominant member and couldn't leave the group without dying, your best option was compliance. Make yourself useful. Make yourself pleasant. Become whatever they need you to be so they don't cast you out or turn on you. For our ancestors, this wasn't weakness. It was strategy. But in modern life, fawning doesn't protect you. It erases you. It shows up everywhere. The person who can't say no even when they're overwhelmed. The one who laughs at jokes that aren't funny, agrees with opinions they don't hold, absorbs blame for things they didn't do. The people pleaser who prioritizes everyone's comfort except their own. On the surface, it looks like kindness. Underneath, it's survival. Fawning works by you emptying conflict. If you can sense someone's mood shifting, you adjust before they even voice their displeasure. If you can anticipate what they want, you offer it before they ask. You become hyper-attuned to other people's emotional states, not because you care about them, but because your safety depends on keeping them calm. It's emotional labor as self-defense. And it's exhausting. Because fawning isn't just about what you do. It's about what you suppress. Every time you swallow your own needs to prioritize someone else's, every time you agree when you want to disagree, every time you smile through discomfort, you're training your nervous system that your feelings don't matter. That your boundaries are negotiable. That your worth is contingent on how well you serve others. Over time, fawning stops being a response and starts being an identity. You lose track of what you actually want because you've spent so long figuring out what everyone else wants. You don't know how to set boundaries because boundaries feel like aggression. You can't recognize when you're being mistreated because mistreatment has become your baseline for normal. The fawn response doesn't just erase your boundaries. It attracts people who benefit from that erasure. Manipulators, narcissists, anyone looking for someone they can control, they recognize fawning the way predators recognize prey. And they move in. Breaking the fawn response means learning to tolerate other people's discomfort. It means accepting that someone might get angry, and that's not your emergency to fix. It means believing that you're allowed to take up space, even when it inconveniences someone else. None of that feels safe when your nervous system has been running on appeasement for years. But staying small doesn't keep you safe. It just keeps you trapped. Threat detection. Your brain is scanning right now. You don't notice it, but it's happening. Every face you pass, every sound in the background, every shift in tone during a conversation. Your nervous system is running a constant threat assessment, filtering thousands of inputs per second, sorting safe from uncertain from dangerous. And it's doing all of this without asking for your permission or your awareness. This is threat detection. The system that kept your ancestors alive by catching the rustle in the grass before the predator emerged. The one that learned to read facial expressions for signs of aggression, to hear footsteps and determine intent, to sense when something in the environment had changed in a way that mattered. It's fast. Faster than thought. Your amygdala, the part of your brain responsible for processing threats, can trigger a fear response in milliseconds. You feel the spike of anxiety before you even know what caused it. That's by design. In a life or death situation, thinking takes too long. Your body needs to react now, and your conscious mind can catch up later. But the system isn't perfect. It's tuned for sensitivity, not accuracy, because in the ancestral environment a false alarm was annoying. A missed threat was fatal, so your threat detection system errs on the side of caution. It overacts. It sees danger in things that aren't dangerous. A stranger's neutral expression reads as hostile. An unexpected loud noise triggers panic. A moment of silence in a conversation feels like rejection. And once it flags something as a threat, your body responds whether the threat is real or not. Your heart rate spikes. Your breathing quickens. Stress hormones flood your system. You're primed for action, and all of that happens before your rational brain has a chance to assess whether the threat actually exists. This is why people flinch at sudden movements, even when they know they're safe. Why a text that says "we need to talk" triggers immediate anxiety. Why walking into a room full of strangers feels dangerous even though nothing bad is happening. Your threat detection system doesn't care about context. It cares about patterns. And if something matches the pattern of past danger, real or perceived, it sounds the alarm. The problem gets worse when the system learns from experience. If you've been hurt before, your brain stores that information and uses it to predict future threats. Betrayal teaches you to scan for signs of dishonesty. Rejection teaches you to brace for abandonment. Criticism teaches you to interpret neutral feedback as attack. Your threat detection system isn't trying to make you paranoid. It's trying to protect you from experiencing that pain again. But protection becomes prison when the system can't tell the difference between real danger and perceived risk. You start avoiding situations that aren't actually dangerous. You start reading malice into neutral interactions. You start living in a state of constant alertness because your brain has decided that everything is a potential threat. And the more you avoid, the more your threat detection system tightens its grip, shrinking your world down to only what feels completely safe, which, eventually, is almost nothing. Hypervigilance. The sound of a door closing makes you jump. Footsteps in the hallway pull your attention away from what you were doing. You scan the room when you walk in, checking exits, noting who's where, assessing whether anything feels off. You can't relax in public spaces. You can't focus when your back is to the door. Every sound, every movement, every unexpected shift registers as something you need to monitor. This is hypervigilance. Threat detection that never shuts off. It starts as protection. Maybe you lived through something where being alert kept you safe. An unstable household where you learned to read the mood before walking into a room. A dangerous relationship where missing a warning sign meant getting hurt. A traumatic event that taught you the world isn't as safe as you thought. So your nervous system adapted. It turned the volume up on everything. It stopped filtering out irrelevant information. It decided that the cost of missing a threat was too high, so it would treat everything as a potential threat until proven otherwise. And it worked. For a while. Hypervigilance kept you one step ahead. It helped you navigate situations that genuinely required constant monitoring. But the problem is, it doesn't turn off when the danger passes. Your nervous system doesn't get the memo that you're safe now. It just keeps running the same program, scanning for threats that no longer exist, burning through your energy reserves to protect you from situations that aren't happening. Hypervigilance is exhausting, not just mentally, physically. Your body stays in a state of elevated arousal. Your muscles stay tense. Your heart rate stays elevated. Your stress hormones stay high. You're running a marathon while sitting still, and you can't figure out why you're always so tired. It wrecks your ability to be present. Conversations become hard to follow because half your attention is tracking background noise. You can't enjoy moments that should be relaxing because you're too busy monitoring for problems. You're never fully anywhere because part of you is always somewhere else, scanning the perimeter, checking for danger. And it distorts your perception. When you're hypervigilant, neutral becomes suspicious. Ambiguous becomes threatening. Someone's delayed text response isn't just late, it's a sign they're pulling away. A coworker's brief tone isn't just stress, it's anger directed at you. A partner's quiet mood isn't just tiredness, it's the beginning of the end. You're not being paranoid. You're being vigilant, but your system has lost the ability to distinguish between caution and catastrophizing. Hypervigilance doesn't just strain you. It strains everyone around you. Because when you're constantly scanning for threats, other people start to feel like they're under surveillance. They can't relax around you because you can't relax. They start walking on eggshells because your system treats small mistakes like major violations. The vigilance that's meant to protect you starts pushing people away, which only confirms what your nervous system already believed, that you're not safe, and you need to stay alert. Breaking hypervigilance doesn't mean letting your guard down. It means teaching your nervous system to calibrate again. To remember that not every sound is a warning. That not every surprise is a threat. That safety isn't the same as constant control. It's hard work. Because hypervigilance feels like the only thing keeping you safe, even when it's the thing making you most afraid. Startle Reflex. A door slams behind you. Your whole body jerks. Your heart pounds. For a split second, you're flooded with adrenaline, primed for danger that isn't there. The rational part of your brain knows it was just a door. But your body reacted before your brain could catch up. That's the startle reflex. The fastest threat response your nervous system has. It's hardwired into your brainstem, the most primitive part of your brain. No thinking required. No decision-making involved. A sudden loud noise, a flash of movement in your peripheral vision, an unexpected touch, and your body goes into instant defense mode. Your muscles contract. Your shoulders hunch. Your eyes widen. You might gasp or freeze for a fraction of a second. All of it happens in milliseconds, faster than conscious thought. The startle reflex exists because speed matters more than accuracy when survival is on the line. In the wild, that sudden noise could be a predator. That flash of movement could be an attack. Your ancestors who stopped to think about it didn't survive long enough to pass on their genes. The ones who reacted first and asked questions later lived to reproduce. So you inherited a system that prioritizes reaction over reflection. But modern life is full of sudden stimuli that aren't dangerous. Car horns, dropped dishes, phones buzzing, doors closing. None of these are threats, but your startle reflex doesn't know that. It fires anyway, dumping adrenaline into your system, putting your body on high alert, preparing you for danger that never arrives. And here's the problem. The more you startle, the more sensitive your system becomes. If you're already on edge, already anxious, already stressed, your startle threshold drops. Smaller and smaller stimuli trigger bigger and bigger reactions. A normal conversation volume startles you. A gentle touch makes you jump. You're living in a state where your nervous system interprets the world as constantly dangerous, even when it's not. Chronic startle doesn't just exhaust you. It trains your brain to expect threat. Every unexpected sound becomes a potential attack. every sudden movement becomes something to defend against. You start avoiding situations where you might be startled, which only makes the sensitivity worse. Your world shrinks, not because it's more dangerous, but because your nervous system has lost the ability to distinguish between a real threat and a harmless surprise. The startle reflex isn't something you can turn off, but you can teach your system to recover faster. To recognize that the startle happened, the danger didn't materialize, and it's safe to stand down. Because staying in constant defense mode doesn't protect you. It just keeps you trapped in a body that can't tell the difference between a slammed door and actual danger. Safety seeking. You double-check the lock before bed. Then you check it again. You avoid certain streets, certain situations, certain people, not because anything bad happened, but because something bad could happen. You plan escape routes. You sit where you can see the exits. You structure your entire life around minimizing risk, and it feels like control, like protection. But somewhere along the way, safety seeking stopped being helpful and started running your life. Safety seeking is a natural response. Your brain is wired to avoid danger and pursue security. That instinct kept your ancestors alive. They learned which plants were poisonous, which animals were predators, which situations were worth avoiding. The ones who took unnecessary risks died young. The ones who played it safe lived longer. So you inherited a nervous system that prioritizes caution. In moderation, that's healthy. Locking your door at night makes sense. Looking both ways before crossing the street is rational. Avoiding genuinely dangerous situations is smart survival behavior. But safety seeking becomes a problem when it stops being proportional to actual risk. When you start organizing your life around avoiding discomfort instead of avoiding danger. When you check the lock not because you forgot, but because the anxiety won't quiet down until you've checked it 5 times. When you avoid social situations not because they're threatening, but because they feel uncertain. When you turn down opportunities not because they're risky, but because they're unfamiliar. The trap is that safety seeking works in the short term. Avoiding the thing that makes you anxious gives you immediate relief. Your nervous system interprets that relief as confirmation that the avoidance was necessary. So next time the situation comes up, it pushes you to avoid again. The problem never gets tested. The fear never gets challenged. And your brain's assessment of what's dangerous gets wider and wider, while your sense of what's safe gets narrower and narrower. Over time, safety seeking creates the opposite of safety. It creates a world where everything outside your carefully controlled routine feels threatening. Where uncertainty equals danger. Where discomfort is something to avoid at all costs. You're not safer, you're just smaller. Living in a space that keeps shrinking because your nervous system has decided that anything unfamiliar is something to fear. And the cruel irony is that the more you seek safety, the less safe you feel. Because safety seeking doesn't build confidence. It reinforces the belief that you need protection, that the world is dangerous, that you can't handle uncertainty. Every avoided situation is another vote of no confidence in your ability to cope. Another confirmation that you're fragile. Another piece of evidence that you need to stay small to stay safe. Real safety isn't about controlling every variable. It's about building the capacity to handle uncertainty, to tolerate discomfort, to trust that you can navigate situations even when they don't go according to plan. But you can't build that capacity if you're always avoiding the situations that would teach you. Safety seeking doesn't protect you. It traps you in a life that gets smaller every time you choose certainty over growth. Disgust response. You smell rotting food and your stomach turns. You see something contaminated and you pull back. The reaction is instant, visceral, beyond your control. Disgust isn't something you decide to feel. It's something that happens to you. And it's one of the most powerful survival tools your brain has. Disgust evolved to keep you from ingesting toxins, spoiled meat, contaminated water, feces, bodily fluids that could carry disease. Your ancestors who felt disgust and avoided these things lived longer. The ones who didn't got sick and died. So your brain developed a specialized threat detection system tuned specifically for contamination. It doesn't just warn you. It physically repels you. Nausea, the urge to vomit, the need to get away. All of it designed to keep dangerous substances out of your body. But disgust doesn't stay contained to physical threats. It spreads. Your brain learned to attach the disgust response to anything associated with contamination. Not just the spoiled food, but the place where you found it. Not just the disease, but the person who had it. Disgust became a social tool, a way to enforce group boundaries, to mark outsiders, to create hierarchies of clean and unclean. Behaviors that violated social norms triggered the same disgust as rotten food. People who broke taboos got the same visceral rejection as contaminated objects. That's why moral disgust feels physical. Why thinking about certain behaviors makes your stomach turn the same way spoiled milk does. Your brain is using the same system designed to protect you from toxins to police social and moral boundaries. And just like with physical contamination, disgust doesn't reason. It just reacts. The problem is that disgust is easy to weaponize. Because it's visceral, it bypasses rational thought. You can't logic your way out of feeling disgusted. Once something triggers that response, your brain has already categorized it as dangerous, contaminated, something to avoid. That makes disgust a powerful tool for manipulation. Attach disgust to a group of people, and suddenly they're not just different, they're contaminated. Dangerous. Something that needs to be kept separate, pushed away, eliminated. History is full of examples. Every genocide, every campaign of dehumanization has used disgust as a weapon, portraying the target group as dirty, diseased vermin, triggering the same visceral response your brain uses for spoiled food, making rejection feel like survival instead of bigotry. Disgust doesn't make you a bad person, but it does make you vulnerable to bad ideas. Because once disgust takes to something, it's hard to undo. You can know intellectually that the disgust is irrational, but the feeling doesn't go away. Your body still reacts like there's a threat, even when there isn't one. And that gap between what you know and what you feel is where manipulation lives. Understanding disgust doesn't eliminate it, but it does give you a chance to question it. To ask whether what you're feeling is warning you about real danger, or whether it's being used to justify rejecting something or someone who isn't actually a threat. Because disgust isn't always wrong, but it's not always right either, and the difference matters. Predator detection bias. You're walking through a parking garage late at night. You hear footsteps behind you. Your heart rate spikes. You quicken your pace. You glance back. It's just someone heading to their car, completely unaware of you. But for those few seconds, your brain was convinced you were being followed. That's not paranoia. That's your predator detection system doing exactly what it was designed to do. Your brain is constantly scanning for threats, and it's specifically tuned to detect predators. Anything that moves in a way that suggests intent. Anything that follows. Anything that watches. Your ancestors who were good at spotting predators survived. The ones who missed the signs got eaten. So evolution built you a system that errs on the side of caution. Better to mistake a rustling bush for a lion and be wrong than to ignore it and be dead. But here's the catch. The system is biased toward false positives. It's calibrated to see threats even when they're not there. A shadow becomes a figure. A coincidence becomes a pattern. A neutral glance becomes surveillance. Your brain doesn't wait for proof. It acts on suspicion because waiting could be fatal. In the wild, that bias saved lives. In modern life, it creates paranoia. Someone walks the same direction as you for 3 blocks, and your brain flags it as following. A coworker looks at you twice during a meeting, and you're convinced they're monitoring you. A stranger makes brief eye contact, and you feel watched. None of these are actual threats. But your predator detection system doesn't care. It's not designed to be accurate. It's designed to keep you alive. And in its calculation, overreacting is safer than underreacting. The bias gets worse when you're already anxious. When you're stressed, your threat detection threshold drops. Neutral becomes suspicious. Ambiguous becomes threatening. Your brain starts seeing predators everywhere because it's operating from a baseline assumption that you're in danger. Every interaction gets filtered through that lens. Every unexpected event becomes potential evidence of a threat. And once the bias locks in, it's self-reinforcing. You notice the things that confirm the threat and ignore the things that contradict it. The person who walked behind you for 3 blocks becomes proof you were being followed. The fact that they turned off at their own destination doesn't register. Your brain has already filed the incident under threat, and it's not interested in revising that assessment. This is how people end up living in a constant state of vigilance, convinced they're being targeted when they're not. Convinced someone is watching when no one is. Convinced every ambiguous situation is hostile when most of them are neutral. The predator detection bias isn't lying to you. It's doing exactly what it evolved to do. But it's doing it in a world where most of the shadows are just shadows, and most of the footsteps behind you are just people heading to their cars. You can't turn the system off, but you can learn to question it. To notice when your brain is jumping to threat, and ask whether the evidence actually supports that conclusion. Because the bias towards seeing predators was adaptive when predators were common. But in a world where most threats are social, not physical, it just makes you afraid of people who were never dangerous in the first place. Risk detection. Should you send the text? Should you speak up in the meeting? Should you try the new restaurant, take the different route, start the conversation? The question loops in your head. You're weighing the risk, calculating the potential downside, trying to figure out if it's worth it. And most of the time, you decide it's not. Risk detection is supposed to help you make smart decisions. Your brain evaluates potential threats and potential rewards, compares them, and guides you toward choices that maximize safety and benefit. When it works, it keeps you from walking into danger. When it misfires, it keeps you from walking into life. The problem is that your risk detection system is built on an outdated threat model. It evolved in an environment where most risks were physical and immediate. A bad decision could mean injury, starvation, death. So your brain learned to weigh potential losses much more heavily than potential gains. Losing something you already have feels worse than gaining something new feels good. That's not a bug. That's a feature. In a world where resources were scarce and dangers were real, playing it safe was usually the right call. But modern risks are different. Most of the decisions you face aren't life or death. They're social, emotional, professional. The downside of sending the text isn't injury. It's potential rejection. The downside of speaking up isn't starvation. It's potential embarrassment. The downside of trying something new isn't death. It's potential discomfort. But your brain doesn't know that. It processes all risks through the same system designed for survival threats. So it overweights the potential negative outcome and underweights the potential positive one. It tells you that rejection would be devastating, that embarrassment would be unbearable, that discomfort is dangerous. And because your brain's risk assessment feels like objective truth, you listen to it. You choose safety over possibility. You avoid the risk. And in the short term, that feels like protection. You didn't get rejected. You didn't get embarrassed. You didn't experience discomfort. But you also didn't grow. You didn't connect. You didn't try. And over time, those avoided risks add up. Not into safety, but into stagnation. The cruel part is that avoiding risk creates its own kind of danger. When you stop taking chances, you stop building resilience. You stop learning that you can handle discomfort, navigate rejection, survive embarrassment. Your assessment of what's risky gets wider, and your tolerance for uncertainty gets narrower. The world starts to feel more dangerous not because it is, but because you've lost confidence in your ability to handle it. Risk detection isn't wrong, but it's tuned for a world you don't live in anymore, a world where most risks had irreversible consequences. In modern life, most of the risks your brain tells you to avoid aren't actually dangerous. They're just uncomfortable. And the difference between danger and discomfort is everything. Because avoiding danger keeps you safe. Avoiding discomfort keeps you stuck. Approach-Avoidance Conflict. You want it. You also don't want it. The job opportunity that could advance your career but would mean more responsibility, more pressure, more visibility. The relationship that could bring connection but also vulnerability, dependence, potential loss. The goal you've been working toward that now feels terrifyingly close, and part of you wants to self-sabotage just to make the tension stop. Welcome to Approach-Avoidance Conflict. The psychological trap where the thing you want is also the thing you fear. It happens when a single goal carries both reward and threat. Getting close feels good because you want it. But getting close also feels dangerous because of what achieving it would cost, change, or demand from you. So you move toward it, then pull back. Move forward, then retreat. Stuck in a loop where progress feels impossible because every step forward triggers the urge to step back. Your brain is designed to approach rewards and avoid threats. Those are two separate systems, and usually they don't conflict. Food is good, poison is bad. Safety is good, danger is bad. But approach-avoidance conflict forces both systems to fire at once, aimed at the same target. Your approach system says go, your avoidance system says stop, and you're caught in the middle, paralyzed by opposing impulses. The conflict gets worse the closer you get to the goal. When it's far away, the reward feels bigger than the threat. So you move toward it. But as you get closer, the threat looms larger. The stakes feel higher. The risks feel more real. What seemed worth pursuing from a distance starts to feel overwhelming up close. And that's when you stall. Or sabotage. Or find reasons why actually, this isn't what you wanted after all. It's why people ghost right before a relationship gets serious. Why they quit jobs right before a promotion. Why they blow up progress right when success is within reach. It's not failure. It's not lack of commitment. It's a nervous system trying to resolve an impossible equation. How to get the thing you want without facing the thing you fear. And the fear isn't always obvious. Sometimes it's fear of failure. But just as often, it's fear of success. Fear that achieving the goal will change who you are. That it will bring expectations you can't meet. That it will expose you as a fraud. That the reward won't be worth what you sacrifice to get it. So you stay stuck in the conflict, close enough to imagine success, but far enough to avoid the cost. The only way out is through. Not by resolving the conflict, but by accepting that both the approach and the avoidance are real. That you can want something and fear it at the same time. That moving forward doesn't mean the fear disappears. It just means you're choosing to tolerate it. Because staying stuck in the conflict doesn't protect you from the threat. It just guarantees you never get the reward. And the cost of that, over time, is higher than anything you were afraid of in the first place. Behavioral inhibition system. Some people walk into a party and scan for familiar faces before they relax. Others hesitate before speaking up in meetings, running through what they'll say 3 times before opening their mouth. They double-check their work, second-guess their decisions, hold back when others push forward. It's not insecurity. It's not overthinking. It's a biological system designed to keep them alive by keeping them cautious. This is the behavioral inhibition system. Your brain's pause button. Everyone has this system, but not everyone's is set to the same sensitivity. For some people, it's a quiet background check. For others, it's a constant brake that slows down nearly every decision, every action, every impulse. The system evolved to protect you from danger by making you hesitate long enough to assess whether moving forward is safe. In the wild, that hesitation saved lives. The animal that charged toward every new stimulus without pausing got killed. The one that stopped, assessed, checked for threats survived. So evolution built a system that registers novelty, uncertainty, and potential punishment, then triggers caution. Your heart rate increases slightly. Your attention narrows. Your body prepares to stop, retreat, or stay still rather than move forward. When the system is balanced, it's useful. It's the feeling that makes you pause before sending an angry email. The instinct that tells you to check the room before speaking. The hesitation that keeps you from making impulsive decisions you'll regret. It's risk assessment in real time. But when the system runs too high, it doesn't just create caution. It creates paralysis. People with overactive inhibition systems don't just hesitate. They freeze at every decision point. They avoid new situations because novelty feels threatening. They stay quiet because speaking up triggers the system's alarm. They turn down opportunities because the uncertainty outweighs any potential reward. It's not that they don't want to engage. It's that their nervous system treats engagement itself as dangerous. And the system reinforces itself. Every time you avoid a situation because it felt uncertain, your inhibition system logs that as evidence that avoidance was the right call. You didn't get hurt, so the caution worked. Except you also didn't grow, didn't learn, didn't discover that the situation wasn't actually dangerous. Your system gets more sensitive, your world gets smaller, and the threshold for what feels safe keeps dropping. Children with high behavioral inhibition grow into adults who are careful, conscientious, sensitive to punishment and disapproval. They're less likely to take reckless risks, but they're also less likely to take necessary ones. They hesitate when others act. They withdraw when others engage. They stay safe, but they also stay stuck. The inhibition system isn't the enemy. It's trying to protect you. But protection becomes prison when every new situation triggers the alarm, when every uncertain outcome feels like a threat, when hesitation becomes the default response to life itself. Because the world rewards action, and if your system is designed to stop you from acting, you're not safer. You're just smaller. And over time, that caution doesn't feel like wisdom. It feels like a wall between you and everything you want. Behavioral activation system. You see an opportunity and you move toward it. A potential reward, a new possibility, something that could bring pleasure, success, connection. The pull is immediate. You don't overthink it. You act. That's your behavioral activation system, the engine that drives you toward reward. Where the inhibition system tells you to stop and assess, the activation system tells you to go and get. It's tuned to detect positive outcomes and motivate you to pursue them. A job posting that matches your skills. A person who might be interested. A chance to try something you've been thinking about. Your activation system registers the potential gain and pushes you forward. Your heart rate increases, but not from fear. From anticipation. Your focus sharpens on the goal. Your body primes for action. When this system is strong, it creates drive. Ambition. The willingness to take risks for potential reward. People with high activation are the ones who apply for the job even when they're not fully qualified, who start the conversation even when rejection is possible, who try the new thing even when failure is likely. They move toward opportunity faster than they move away from threat. But like every system, it can misfire. When activation runs too high, it doesn't just create drive. It creates impulsivity. You chase rewards without assessing the cost. You pursue opportunities without weighing the risk. You act on every impulse because the pull toward potential gain overrides the pause. That would tell you to think it through. It's why people make reckless decisions in pursuit of reward. Why they ignore warning signs when something feels exciting. Why they keep chasing outcomes that hurt them. Because the activation system is stronger than the inhibition system that should be pumping the brakes. And when activation runs too low, you don't just lose drive. You lose motivation entirely. Nothing feels worth pursuing. Opportunities don't register as opportunities. Rewards don't feel rewarding. You're not paralyzed by fear. You're just not moved by anything. Depression often looks like this. Not heightened inhibition. Just absent activation. The system that's supposed to pull you toward life has gone quiet, and without it, everything feels flat, pointless, exhausting. The balance between inhibition and activation shapes your entire personality. High activation, low inhibition creates the risk taker. Low activation, high inhibition creates the avoider. High on both creates the person caught in constant internal conflict, wanting to move forward but feeling held back at every step. Low on both creates detachment, neither pursuing nor avoiding, just drifting. Neither system is good or bad, but the ratio between them determines whether you engage with the world or withdraw from it, whether you chase what you want or stay where it's safe, whether you take the leap or stay on the edge wondering what would have happened if you had. And the frustrating part is that you don't get to choose your baseline. You inherit a system already calibrated, already set to a sensitivity level you didn't pick. What you do get to choose is whether you recognize how it's operating and whether you're willing to push against it when it's holding you back. Pain avoidance motivation. Touch a hot stove and you pull your hand back before you even register the burn. Step on something sharp and your body recoils instantly. Pain teaches you what to avoid, and it teaches you fast. But pain isn't just physical. And the avoidance doesn't stop at stoves and sharp objects. Your brain treats emotional pain the same way it treats physical pain. Rejection activates the same neural pathways as a broken bone. Social exclusion registers in the brain's pain centers just like a physical injury. Your nervous system doesn't distinguish between the pain of a wound and the pain of humiliation. It just knows something hurts, and it's motivated to make sure you don't experience it again. So you avoid. Not just the hot stove, but the conversation that might go badly. Not just the sharp object, but the relationship that might end in rejection. Not just the physical danger, but the emotional risk that could leave you feeling exposed, inadequate, or alone. Pain avoidance is supposed to keep you safe, and it does. But it also keeps you limited, because emotional pain is different from physical pain in one critical way. You can't always avoid the things that cause it without also avoiding the things that matter. You can avoid hot stoves and never miss out on anything important. But if you avoid rejection, you also avoid connection. If you avoid failure, you also avoid growth. If you avoid feeling inadequate, you also avoid challenges that would build competence. The problem is that your brain doesn't make that distinction. It just registers pain and marks the situation as something to avoid. The next time a similar situation comes up, your nervous system flags it as dangerous and pushes you away. You don't consciously decide to avoid it. You just feel the resistance, the discomfort, the urge to stay away. And you listen to it because it feels like self-preservation. Over time, pain avoidance rewrites your life around what won't hurt. You stop reaching out because rejection might sting. You stop trying because failure feels unbearable. You stay in situations that are comfortable but stifling because leaving would mean facing uncertainty, and uncertainty carries the possibility of pain. You're not choosing safety. You're being controlled by the memory of past pain and the anticipation of future pain, both of which your brain treats as threats equivalent to physical injury. And the cruel irony is that avoiding pain doesn't actually protect you from suffering. It just trades acute pain for chronic dissatisfaction. The sting of rejection is sharp but brief. The ache of a life not lived is dull but endless. But your brain is wired to avoid the sharp pain, even when it means accepting the dull one. Because pain avoidance is designed for immediate survival, not long-term fulfillment. And if you let it run your decisions, you'll survive. But you won't thrive. You'll just stay safe in a life that feels smaller every time you choose to avoid the risk of feeling something you don't want to feel. Immediate survival prioritization. Your brain is running a calculation right now. Immediate threat or long-term goal. Present discomfort or future benefit. The thing that needs handling now or the thing that matters more later. And almost every time your brain picks now. Not because you're impulsive. Because you're wired for survival. When your ancestors faced a predator, they didn't think about long-term health. They thought about not dying in the next 30 seconds. When they were starving, they didn't worry about tomorrow's meal. They worried about getting calories now. Survival prioritizes the immediate because in life or death situations, there is no later. If you don't handle the present threat, you don't get a future. So evolution built you a system that treats immediate concerns as more urgent than long-term ones. Acute stress overrides chronic planning. Present discomfort outweighs future consequences. Right now always feels more important than eventually. That system still runs today, even though most of your threats aren't life or death anymore. You know you should save for retirement, but the immediate desire to buy something you want feels more pressing. You know you should exercise, but the present discomfort of effort outweighs the distant benefit of health. You know you should have the difficult conversation, but avoiding the immediate discomfort feels more urgent than addressing the long-term problem. Your brain is doing exactly what it was designed to do, prioritizing immediate survival over future planning. The problem is that in modern life, most of what actually matters is long-term. Your health, your relationships, your career, your financial stability. All of it requires sacrificing immediate comfort for future benefit. But your survival system doesn't care about future benefit. It cares about right now. And right now, the future threat doesn't feel real. The immediate discomfort does. So you choose the thing that makes now easier, even when it makes later harder. You avoid the conversation because facing it feels bad right now, even though avoiding it guarantees the problem gets worse. You skip the workout because effort is uncomfortable now, even though skipping it means accepting worse health later. You spend the money because the reward is immediate, even though saving it would mean security down the road. And every time you prioritize the immediate, you reinforce the pattern. Your brain learns that avoiding discomfort works. That future consequences are abstract and present relief is real. That right now is what matters because right now is what you can feel. Immediate survival prioritization isn't a personal failing. It's biology. But it's biology designed for a world where most threats were immediate and most decisions had short-term consequences. In that world, prioritizing now made sense. In this world, it means sacrificing the future to make the present more comfortable. And the gap between what your brain is designed to prioritize and what actually builds a good life is the distance between surviving and thriving. Because surviving is about making it through today. Thriving is about building something that lasts. And you can't do the second if your system is locked on the first. Loss aversion as survival bias. Would you rather gain $100 or avoid losing $100? Logically, they're the same. Financially, the outcome is identical. But they don't feel the same. Losing 100 feels worse than gaining 100 feels good. And that asymmetry shapes almost every decision you make. This is loss aversion, the bias that makes losses loom larger than gains. It's not irrational. It's survival math. For your ancestors, losing a resource could mean death. Losing food when food was scarce could mean starvation. Losing shelter could mean exposure. Losing status in the group could mean exile. The cost of a loss was catastrophic. The benefit of an equivalent gain was helpful but not life-saving. So evolution built you a system that weighs potential losses much more heavily than potential gains. Because in a world of scarcity and danger, avoiding loss was more critical to survival than pursuing gain. That bias is still running. and it's running in a world where most losses aren't life-threatening. You don't take the job opportunity because leaving your current position feels like losing security, even though staying means missing growth. You don't end the relationship that's not working because being alone feels like losing connection, even though staying means accepting unhappiness. You don't sell the investment that's declining because locking in the loss feels worse than holding on and hoping it recovers, even when the rational move is to cut your losses. Loss aversion doesn't just influence financial decisions. It shapes how you navigate risk, relationships, and change. You cling to what you have even when what you have isn't working, because losing it feels unbearable. You stay in situations that are comfortable but stagnant, because leaving would mean losing the known for the unknown. You avoid change, because change always involves losing something, even if what you're losing is something you've outgrown. And the bias gets worse with uncertainty. When you don't know what you'll gain, but you do know what you'll lose, loss aversion kicks into overdrive. You can imagine the loss vividly. You can feel it already. The gain is abstract, hypothetical. Maybe it will happen, maybe it won't. Your brain treats the certain loss as more real than the possible gain, even when the possible gain is objectively worth the risk. This is why people stay in jobs they hate, relationships that drain them, situations that limit them. Not because they don't want something better, because giving up what they have feels like a guaranteed loss, and what they might gain feels uncertain. Loss aversion makes the devil you know feel safer than the possibility you don't. Even when the devil is slowly killing you. The irony is that by avoiding loss, you guarantee stagnation. You protect what you have, but you never get what you want. You avoid the pain of losing, but you also avoid the possibility of gaining. And over time, the cost of staying where you are becomes higher than the cost of the loss you were so afraid of. But by then, you've spent so long avoiding loss that change feels impossible. Not because it is. Because your survival system has convinced you that losing anything, even something that's not serving you, is a threat you can't afford to take. Resource guarding. Someone reeks for the last slice of pizza at a work lunch, and you feel a flash of irritation. Not because you were about to take it, because it's disappearing and you didn't get a chance to claim it. A colleague gets the promotion you wanted, and you feel a twist of resentment, not because you begrudge their success, but because there was only one spot and it wasn't yours. Someone's getting attention, recognition, resources, and your immediate reaction is to calculate what that means you're not getting. This is resource guarding. The instinct to protect what's yours and resent when others take what could have been. It's not greed. It's not pettiness. It's an ancient survival mechanism designed for a world where resources were scarce and competition was real. Your ancestors lived in environments where food, mates, status, and safety were limited. If someone else got it, you didn't. If they ate the food, you went hungry. If they took the mate, you didn't reproduce. If they claimed the shelter, you faced exposure. Guarding resources and competing for access wasn't optional. It was survival. So your brain learned to track resources, monitor who has what, and react with urgency when something you need, or might need, is being taken by someone else. That reaction still fires today, even when the stakes aren't remotely life or death. It shows up in small ways. The annoyance when someone takes the parking spot you were heading for. The defensiveness when a coworker takes credit for an idea you contributed to. The subtle hostility when someone in your social circle gets more attention, more praise, more success. You're not consciously thinking about survival, but your brain is treating the situation like a zero-sum game where someone else's gain is your loss. Resource guarding doesn't just create conflict with others. It creates scarcity thinking in you. When you're in guarding mode, you stop seeing abundance and start seeing competition. Every opportunity feels like it's running out. Every win someone else gets feels like one less win available to you. Every bit of recognition they receive feels like recognition you're being denied. It's exhausting. And it's lonely. Because when you're guarding, you're not collaborating. You're competing, even with people who aren't your competition. The instinct gets worse when you feel insecure. When you're not confident in your access to resources, when you feel like what you have could be taken away, when you're worried there won't be enough, resource guarding goes into overdrive. You hoard opportunities. You resist sharing credit. You feel threatened by other people's success because it reminds you of your own scarcity. You're not protecting what you have. You're trying to protect yourself from the fear of losing it. And the cruelest part is that resource guarding creates the very scarcity it fears. When you treat every situation like a competition, people stop wanting to collaborate with you. When you guard your resources too tightly, others stop offering theirs. When you react to someone else's gain as your loss, you isolate yourself from the networks and relationships that actually create access to resources. You're trying to survive by hoarding, but you're cutting yourself off from the abundance that comes from connection, collaboration, and trust. Resource guarding made sense in a world where survival was zero-sum. But in a world where most resources aren't scarce, where collaboration creates more value than competition, where your success doesn't require someone else's failure, guarding just makes you smaller. It doesn't protect you. It isolates you. And the irony is that the more you guard, the less you have, because you've mistaken survival instinct for strategy in a world that doesn't run on scarcity anymore. Territoriality. Someone sits in your usual seat at the cafe. You walk into your office and find a coworker using your desk. A neighbor parks in the spot you always use. The rational part of your brain knows it's not actually yours. But something deeper doesn't care about logic. It just knows someone is in your space, and that feels wrong. That reaction isn't petty. It's territoriality. The instinct to claim space and defend it. Humans are territorial animals. Not in the way wolves mark boundaries or birds defend nests, but the impulse is the same. You carve out space, physical or social, and your nervous system treats it as yours. The desk you always sit at becomes your desk. The parking spot you use becomes your spot. The role you fill in a group becomes your role. And when someone encroaches, your brain registers it as a boundary violation, even when no formal boundary exists. Territoriality evolved because space meant survival. Access to resources, safety from predators, control over what happened within your boundaries. The groups that successfully claimed and defended territory thrived. The ones that didn't got pushed out, starved, or killed. So your ancestors developed an instinct to establish space and push back when others invaded it. That instinct is still active. But the territories you defend now aren't life or death. They're seats, desks, parking spots, social roles, areas of expertise. Your brain doesn't care. It treats all territorial encroachment the same way, as a threat that needs to be addressed. The response is automatic. Someone steps into your space and your body tenses. Your attention narrows on the intruder. You feel the urge to assert yourself, to reclaim what's yours, to push them back out. It's not aggression for its own sake. It's boundary enforcement. Your nervous system is telling you that letting this slide means losing control, and losing control feels dangerous. But modern territoriality causes problems because the spaces you're defending aren't actually yours. The desk is company property. The parking spot is public. The social role isn't assigned to you exclusively. Your brain is running a script designed for defending actual territory in situations where no real territory exists. So you end up in conflicts that feel significant but are objectively trivial. Fighting over a seat. Resenting a coworker for working in your domain. Feeling threatened when someone does something you thought of as your thing. And it's not just physical space. You defend ideas, expertise, attention. Someone brings up a topic you consider yourself knowledgeable about, and you feel the need to establish dominance in that conversation. Someone gets recognition in an area you think of as yours, and it feels like they're encroaching. you're not defending land. You're defending your sense of ownership over abstract territory. And the defense feels just as urgent. Territoriality isn't wrong. Boundaries matter. But the instinct misfires when it treats every overlap as invasion, when it turns shared spaces into battlegrounds, when it makes you defensive about things that were never exclusively yours to begin with. Because defending territory makes sense when the territory is real. When it's not, you're just fighting to protect an imaginary line that only exists in your head. Mate guarding. Where were you? Who were you with? Why did it take so long to reply? The questions feel reasonable. You're just checking in. But underneath the casualness, there's something else. A need to know. A need to make sure. A need to keep track. This is mate guarding. The impulse to monitor, control, and limit access to your partner. It doesn't always look like jealousy. Sometimes it's subtle. You prefer your partner stays home when you're not around. You're uncomfortable when they get attention from others. You need to know their schedule, their plans, who they're talking to. It feels like care, like connection, like staying close. But what it actually is surveillance. Mate guarding evolved because reproduction required certainty. For males, that meant ensuring the offspring they invested resources in were actually theirs. For females, it meant ensuring their partner didn't redirect resources to someone else. In a world where survival depended on pair bonds and parental investment, guarding made sense. The partners who monitored each other stayed together. The ones who didn't got replaced. So evolution built you a system that gets uneasy when your partner is out of sight, that tracks their interactions with potential rivals, that feels threatened when someone else gets their attention. It's not conscious. It's automatic. Your brain registers your partner as a resource that needs protecting, and it treats other people's interest in them as a threat to your access. But mate guarding doesn't protect relationships. It suffocates them. When you're constantly monitoring, your partner feels controlled. When you're restricting their interactions, they feel isolated. When you're demanding access to their time, attention, and whereabouts, they feel trapped. And here's the cruel irony: the more you guard, the more distance you create. Because no one wants to stay in a relationship where they're treated like property. Mate guarding often escalates. You start with small checks, asking where they're going, who they'll be with, when they'll be back. It feels normal, but your anxiety doesn't ease. So the checks get more frequent. The questions get more detailed. You need more reassurance, more access, more control. And the more you tighten your grip, the more your partner pulls away, which only confirms what you feared, that you're losing them. So you guard harder. And the cycle continues until the relationship collapses under the weight of the surveillance. And it's not always about infidelity. Sometimes it's about attention. You guard your partner's focus, their emotional energy, their time. You resent when they're engaged with friends, work, hobbies, anything that pulls their attention away from you. You're not worried they'll cheat. You're worried they'll realize they don't need you. So you guard access to their world, making yourself the center, the gatekeeper, the only source that matters. Mate guarding doesn't come from love. It comes from fear. Fear of loss, fear of replacement, fear that your partner will discover someone better and leave. And that fear, instead of motivating you to build a relationship worth staying in, motivates you to build walls so high your partner can't see out. You're not protecting the relationship. You're imprisoning it. And eventually, your partner won't leave because they found someone else. They'll leave because staying feels like suffocation. Contamination avoidance. You wouldn't drink from a glass that someone else's mouth touched. You'd hesitate to wear clothes someone else sweated in. You recoil from touching surfaces in public bathrooms. None of these reactions are conscious decisions. They're automatic, visceral. You don't think about avoiding contamination. You just do. And that instinct, designed to keep you safe from disease, shapes far more than your hygiene habits. Contamination avoidance is one of your oldest survival systems. Before modern medicine, before germ theory, your ancestors had to navigate a world full of invisible threats. Spoiled food, stagnant water, bodily fluids decay. The ones who avoided contact with these things lived longer. The ones who didn't got sick and died. So evolution built you a system that doesn't need to understand pathogens to avoid them. It just needs to feel disgust. That disgust is powerful. It's not a mild preference. It's a physical repulsion. Your stomach turns. Your face contorts. You pull back without thinking. The system is designed to override logic because in the world your ancestors lived in, questioning whether something was actually contaminated could kill you. Better to avoid it and be wrong than touch it and be dead. But contamination avoidance doesn't stay confined to physical threats. It spreads to anything your brain associates with danger, disease, or violation. You feel contaminated after touching something that feels morally wrong. You feel the need to wash after being around people you perceive as dirty, not physically, but socially. You avoid objects, places, even ideas that carry an association with something your brain has flagged as impure. The same visceral response that protects you from spoiled food gets triggered by abstract concepts. And once that disgust takes, it's nearly impossible to reason your way out of it. This is why contamination avoidance gets weaponized. Because it's not rational, it's exploitable. Attach the concept of contamination to a group of people, and suddenly they're not just different. They're dirty. Dangerous. Something to be avoided, contained, kept separate. History is full of campaigns that used contamination language to dehumanize. Calling people vermin, parasites, disease carriers. It works because it hijacks a survival response that doesn't stop to evaluate whether the threat is real. And on a personal level, contamination avoidance creates isolation. You start avoiding people, places, experiences because they feel tainted. Not because of actual risk, but because your brain has made an association, and your disgust response won't let it go. Someone hurt you, and now anything connected to them feels contaminated. A place reminds you of something bad, and now you can't go there without feeling the visceral need to leave. An idea makes you uncomfortable, and now you avoid any conversation that might bring it up. Contamination avoidance keeps you safe from real threats. But when it misfires, it keeps you isolated from everything your brain has decided is impure, whether the contamination is real or imagined. And the line between protection and paranoia is thinner than you think. Pathogen avoidance. You see someone cough on the train and you shift away. A coworker looks pale and you keep your distance. Someone mentions they're feeling sick and you suddenly remember something you need to do on the other side of the building. You're not being rude. You're just protecting yourself. This is pathogen avoidance, the system that keeps you away from disease. It runs deeper than conscious hygiene. Your brain is constantly scanning for signs of illness in others. Pallor, coughing, sneezing, lethargy, visible symptoms. When it detects them, it triggers discomfort. You don't want to be near the person. You don't want to touch what they've touched. The urge to create distance is immediate, automatic, and powerful. Pathogen avoidance evolved because disease was one of the most persistent threats your ancestors faced. Infections spread through contact, and the ones who stayed away from sick individuals survived. The ones who didn't got infected and often died. So your immune system developed a behavioral component. Not just fighting off pathogens once they're inside you, but avoiding them before they get in. The system doesn't wait for confirmation. If someone looks sick, your brain treats them as contagious. If something seems unsanitary, you avoid it. Better to overact and stay healthy than underact and get sick. Your pathogen avoidance system is biased toward false positives because the cost of avoiding someone who isn't actually sick is low. The cost of not avoiding someone who is can be fatal. But that same system creates social problems. Because pathogen avoidance doesn't just make you avoid sick people. It makes you avoid anyone your brain flags as potentially contaminated. And those flags don't always correlate with actual disease risk. People who look different get flagged. People from unfamiliar groups get treated as higher pathogen risk, not because they are, but because your brain associates unfamiliarity with danger. Strangers trigger more avoidance than familiar faces. Outsiders get more disgust responses than insiders. Your pathogen avoidance system, which evolved to protect you from disease, ends up fueling prejudice against anyone who doesn't fit your group's norms. And the system is sensitive to context. When you're already anxious, already stressed, already feeling vulnerable, your pathogen avoidance threshold drops. You start seeing threat in more people. You avoid more contact. You become more sensitive to any sign of illness, real or imagined. Your world shrinks because your system has decided that more and more people are potential sources of contamination. This is why disease outbreaks amplify xenophobia. Why economic stress increases disgust sensitivity. Why feeling vulnerable makes you more exclusionary. It's not moral failing. It's a pathogen avoidance system running in overdrive, treating social threats the same way it treats biological ones. And when that happens, the system designed to keep you healthy ends up isolating you, dividing you, and justifying cruelty in the name of protection. Pathogen avoidance saves lives. But when it extends beyond actual disease risk to target people, groups, and behaviors that aren't threats, it stops being protection and starts being something darker. Social threat monitoring. You walk into a room and immediately scan faces. Who's friendly? Who's cold? Who looked at you, and how did they look? You replay the conversation from earlier, analyzing tone, searching for signs of judgment, disapproval, or threat. You're not paranoid. You're monitoring. Social threat monitoring is the system that tracks whether you're safe within your group. For your ancestors, the group was survival. Being part of the tribe meant access to food, protection, mates, and resources. Being cast out meant death. So evolution built you a system that constantly evaluates your social standing. Are you valued? Are you at risk of rejection? Are others turning against you? Your brain treats social exclusion as a survival threat because for most of human history it was. That system is still running, and it's exhausting. You track micro-expressions. A brief frown, a moment of hesitation, a shift in tone. Your brain logs it as potential evidence that someone is unhappy with you. You notice when someone doesn't laugh at your joke, doesn't respond to your message, doesn't include you in plans. Each instance gets filed under possible threat. Not because you're oversensitive, but because your social threat monitoring system is designed to catch signals before they escalate into exclusion. The problem is that modern social life is full of ambiguous signals. Someone doesn't text back immediately. Are they busy or are they pulling away? Someone gives a short response in a meeting. Are they distracted or are they dismissing you? A friend doesn't invite you to something. Did they forget or are you being phased out? Your social threat monitoring system doesn't know. So it assumes the worst. Because in the ancestral environment, missing a social threat was dangerous. If the group was turning against you, you needed to know early enough to repair the relationship or find a new group. So your system developed a bias toward detecting threat even when it's not there. False positives were annoying. False negatives were fatal. The ones who saw social threats that weren't real survived. The ones who missed real threats got excluded and died. But that bias creates chronic anxiety in a world where most ambiguous signals aren't actually threats. You spend enormous energy scanning for danger that isn't there, interpreting neutral interactions as negative, overanalyzing every conversation, every expression, every interaction for signs that you're losing standing. And the more you monitor, the more threats you find, because once you're looking for them, everything becomes evidence. Social threat monitoring doesn't just make you anxious. It changes how you behave. You become overly cautious. You avoid saying things that might cause disapproval. You modify yourself to fit what you think others want. You're not being authentic. You're being strategic, trying to minimize the risk that the group will turn on you. But that strategy creates its own problem. Because when you're constantly performing to avoid rejection, people don't see you. They see the version you've constructed to keep yourself safe. And that performance, over time, is just another form of isolation. The monitoring system was adaptive when social exclusion meant death. But in a world where most social threats aren't existential, it just makes you hypervigilant, exhausted, and unable to trust that you're safe even when you are. Coalitional defense instinct. Someone insults your friend and you feel it like an attack on yourself. Someone criticizes your group and you defend it even if you privately agree with the criticism. Someone threatens a member of your team and you rally, not because you like everyone on the team, but because they're yours. This is coalitional defense. The instinct to protect your group from outside threat. Humans are coalition animals. You form groups, and once you're in, your brain treats threats to the group as threats to you. It doesn't matter if you barely know the other members. It doesn't matter if you don't even like them. If they're part of your coalition, attacking them feels like attacking you. And defending them feels like defending yourself. This instinct evolved because survival was group-dependent. Your ancestors lived in tribes where individual survival required group survival. If the group got wiped out, you died with them. If the group thrived, you thrived. So evolution built you a system that bonds you to your coalition and motivates you to defend it, even at personal cost. Coalitional defense is why you feel loyalty to groups you didn't choose. Your country, your hometown, your school. You're willing to defend them against criticism, even when the criticism is accurate, because your brain categorizes them as part of your identity. An attack on them feels like an attack on you. And the instinct gets stronger when the group is under threat. External pressure doesn't divide groups. It unifies them. Facing a common enemy makes you overlook internal conflicts, forgive personal grievances, rally around people you normally can't stand. It's not that the group got better. It's that your coalitional defense system prioritizes unity over disagreement when survival feels at stake. But here's where it gets dangerous. Coalitional defense doesn't require an actual threat. It just requires the perception of one. Tell a group they're under attack, and they'll circle the wagons. Point to an outgroup as a threat, and your in-group will bond against them. It doesn't matter if the threat is real. Once the coalitional defense system activates, questioning the threat feels like betraying the group. And betraying the group feels like suicide. This is how coalitions become tribes. How tribes become hostile. How ordinary people justify cruelty against outsiders. Because once your brain categorizes someone as a threat to your coalition, harming them doesn't feel like aggression. It feels like defense. You're not the villain. You're the protector. And anything you do to the outgroup is justified because you're protecting your own. Coalitional defense also makes you blind to your group's faults. Criticism from outsiders gets dismissed as attack. Criticism from insiders gets treated as disloyalty. Your group can't be wrong because admitting fault feels like weakening the coalition. So you defend positions you don't believe, overlook behavior you'd condemn in others, and justify actions that would horrify you if another group did them. Because your brain isn't evaluating right and wrong. It's evaluating us versus them. And us always wins. Coalitional defense binds communities. But it also fuels conflict, bigotry, and tribalism. Because the same instinct that makes you protect your group makes you hostile to others. And in a world where most threats aren't existential, where groups overlap, where your survival doesn't depend on defeating the outgroup, coalitional defense stops being protection, starts being the reason groups can't coexist. Because your brain is still running a program designed for a world where other tribes were threats and loyalty to your own meant survival. But that world doesn't exist anymore, and the instinct remains. Parental protection response. A child falls on the playground, and before they even cry, you're moving. A stranger raises their voice near your kid, and your body floods with adrenaline. Someone cuts off the car with your family inside, and the rage is instant, disproportionate, overwhelming. You're not thinking. You're reacting. Because when it comes to protecting your offspring, your nervous system doesn't hesitate. This is the parental protection response, the most powerful defensive instinct humans have. It's stronger than self-preservation. Parents throw themselves in front of cars, dive into burning buildings, face down threats that would normally send them running. The calculus changes completely when your child is involved. Your own safety becomes irrelevant. Your survival instinct, the thing that normally keeps you cautious, gets overridden by something deeper, the drive to ensure your genetic legacy survives, even if you don't. Evolution built this response because offspring that survived to reproduce passed on their parents' genes. Parents who prioritized their own safety over their children's didn't leave descendants. So the ones who survived to become your ancestors were the ones willing to die for their kids. That instinct is hardwired now. When your child is threatened, your body prepares for war. The response doesn't require conscious thought. A perceived threat to your child triggers an immediate physiological cascade. Your heart rate spikes. Your strength increases. Your pain tolerance shoots up. Your focus narrows to a single priority: eliminate the threat or get your child to safety. Nothing else exists. Not social norms, not consequences, not risk to yourself. Just the threat and the child. But here's where it gets complicated. The parental protection response doesn't just activate for real threats. It activates for perceived ones. And in modern life, most of what feels like a threat to your child isn't actually dangerous. Another kid takes your child's toy, and your instinct is to intervene, to protect, to make it right. A teacher criticizes your child, and you feel the urge to defend, to challenge, to shield them from the discomfort. Your child faces a setback, and you want to remove the obstacle, smooth the path, ensure they don't experience pain. The protective instinct that evolved to keep your child from being eaten by predators now fires at situations that are uncomfortable but necessary for development. And when you intervene in situations that don't require intervention, you're not protecting your child. You're limiting them. Because discomfort is how they learn. Conflict is how they develop social skills. Failure is how they build resilience. But your parental protection response doesn't distinguish between danger and growth. It just registers distress and pushes you to eliminate it. The instinct also makes you irrational. Someone criticizes your parenting, and it feels like an attack on your child. Someone suggests your kid might need help, and you hear judgment. Your child gets in trouble, and you defend them even when they're clearly wrong, because admitting fault feels like failing to protect. Your nervous system treats any threat to your child, real or perceived, as an emergency that requires an immediate defensive response. Parental protection is essential. But when it fires at everything, when it treats normal childhood challenges as emergencies, when it overrides your ability to let your child struggle and learn, it stops being protection and becomes interference. Because your job isn't to shield your child from every discomfort. It's to prepare them to handle discomfort without you. And you can't do that if your nervous system treats every setback like a predator. Possession defense. Someone borrows your book, and you feel uneasy until it's back. A roommate uses your coffee mug, and it bothers you more than it should. Someone moves your things, and even though nothing's damaged, you're irritated. It's not about the object's value. It's about ownership. It's yours. It's yours, and someone else touching it feels wrong. This is possession defense. The instinct to protect what belongs to you. Humans are one of the few species that recognize ownership. You understand that an object can be yours even when you're not using it, even when it's out of your sight. That recognition creates a bond. Your things become extensions of yourself. And when someone uses them without permission, it doesn't just feel like a boundary violation. It feels like a violation of you. Possession defense evolved because resources were scarce and ownership meant survival. The tools you made, the food you stored, the shelter you built. If someone took them, your survival was at risk. So your ancestors developed an instinct to guard their possessions and react with hostility when others tried to claim them. The ones who defended their resources lived. The ones who didn't lost access to what they needed and died. That instinct is still active, even when the stakes aren't survival. You defend your possessions even when they're replaceable, even when sharing would cost you nothing, even when the other person has more need than you do. Because your brain doesn't evaluate based on logic. It evaluates based on ownership. If it's yours, losing it feels like loss, regardless of the object's actual value. Children show this early. A toddler who wasn't playing with a toy will suddenly defend it the moment another child reaches for it. It's not about the toy. It's about possession. The instinct to protect what's yours emerges before language, before reasoning, before social conditioning. It's primal. And it extends beyond physical objects. You defend your ideas, your space, your role, your identity. Someone uses a phrase you thought of as yours and you feel a flicker of resentment. Someone steps into a responsibility. You consider your territory and you bristle. Someone challenges a belief that's core to your identity, and you defend it like they're trying to take something from you. Because in your brain's calculus they are. Possession defense creates conflict because most things aren't exclusively yours. Shared spaces, shared resources, shared responsibilities. But your instinct doesn't recognize sharing. It recognizes ownership. So every time someone uses something you consider yours, even when they have equal right to it, your nervous system flags it as a threat and pushes you to defend. And the more insecure you feel, the more you defend. When you're worried about scarcity, when you're uncertain about your status, when you feel like what you have could be taken, possession defense intensifies. You guard more tightly. You share less willingly. You react more strongly to any encroachment. You're not protecting valuable resources. You're protecting the feeling of control that comes from ownership. And when that control feels threatened, you defend like your survival depends on it, even when it doesn't. Alarm response. The fire alarm goes off and everyone moves. Not because they smell smoke. Not because they see flames. Because the alarm triggered the response. Your body doesn't wait to verify the threat. It reacts to the signal. Alarm responses are survival shortcuts. Your ancestors didn't have time to investigate every potential danger. When someone in the group shouted a warning, you ran first and asked questions later. The ones who stopped to evaluate whether the alarm was accurate got killed. The ones who reacted immediately survived. So evolution built you a system that treats alarm signals as truth, whether they are or not. That system is still running. A car alarm triggers alertness even when you know it's probably nothing. A phone ringing late at night spikes anxiety before you even check who's calling. Someone raises their voice and your body tenses, preparing for conflict that might not come. The alarm doesn't have to be accurate. It just has to be loud enough, sudden enough, urgent enough to trigger the response. And here's the problem. Modern life is full of alarms that aren't warnings of real danger. News alerts designed to grab attention. Social media notifications engineered to feel urgent. Marketing that uses alarm language to create perceived scarcity. Your nervous system responds to all of it the same way it would respond to a genuine threat, because it can't tell the difference between a survival alarm and a manufactured one. The more alarms you're exposed to, the more chronically activated your system becomes. You're not relaxing between threats. You're staying alert because the next alarm could come at any moment. Your baseline anxiety rises. Your startle threshold drops. You're living in a state of constant low-level emergency, not because you're in danger, because you're surrounded by signals designed to trigger your alarm response. And once you're in that state, false alarms don't feel false. They feel like confirmation that you were right to stay on alert. Someone sends a message that says, "We need to talk," and your alarm response fires before you read the rest. The alarm creates the anxiety, and the anxiety makes you interpret everything through a threat lens, which justifies the alarm. You're trapped in a cycle where alarms produce fear, and fear makes you more sensitive to alarms. The worst part is that real alarms get lost in the noise. When everything feels urgent, nothing is. When your system is constantly triggered, it stops discriminating between actual danger and false signals. You're either numb to all alarms or reactive to everything. And in either case, you've lost the ability to respond appropriately to genuine threats, because your alarm response has been hijacked by a world that profits from keeping you activated. Vigilance fatigue. You can't remember the last time you felt truly relaxed. Even when you're sitting still, part of you is scanning, checking your phone, monitoring the environment, waiting for the next thing to go wrong. You're tired, but you can't let your guard down, because the moment you do, that's when something will happen. This is vigilance fatigue, the exhaustion that comes from never being off duty. Vigilance is supposed to be temporary. Your ancestors would go on high alert when there was danger, then return to baseline when the threat passed. Alert, rest, alert, rest. The system worked because vigilance was expensive. It burned energy, disrupted sleep, impaired digestion. You couldn't stay vigilant indefinitely, so your body would force you to stand down once the danger was gone. But what happens when the danger never feels gone? When your nervous system keeps scanning for threats that might be there, could be there, have been there before. When you can't identify the moment it's safe to relax because you're not sure it ever is. You get stuck in vigilance. Not the acute, focused vigilance responds to a specific threat. The chronic, diffuse vigilance that responds to everything. You're monitoring constantly but not effectively, because your attention is spread too thin to catch actual danger. You're exhausted but not resting, because resting feels dangerous. Vigilance fatigue doesn't just make you tired. It degrades your ability to function. Your memory suffers because your brain is allocating resources to threat detection instead of encoding information. Your decision-making deteriorates because you're operating from a place of constant stress. Your relationships strain because you're never fully present. Part of you is always somewhere else, scanning for problems. And the fatigue creates a trap. You're too tired to maintain effective vigilance, but you're too anxious to stop being vigilant. So you end up in a state where you're constantly monitoring but constantly missing things, which only increases your anxiety and drives you to monitor more. You're running on empty, trying to protect yourself from threats you're too exhausted to accurately identify. Vigilance fatigue also makes you reactive. When you're running on fumes, small things feel big. Minor inconveniences become crises. Neutral interactions feel threatening. You're snapping at people who don't deserve it, overreacting to situations that don't warrant it, because your nervous system has no reserves left. Everything feels like it demands an immediate response, because you don't have the energy to evaluate whether it actually does. Breaking vigilance fatigue doesn't mean ignoring real threats. It means teaching your nervous system that not everything requires monitoring, that you can take breaks without disaster striking. That rest isn't a luxury, it's a requirement. Because you can't protect yourself effectively when you're too exhausted to think clearly. And vigilance that never stops isn't protection. It's just a different kind of threat, one that's eating you from the inside. Scarcity reactivity. The store announces a limited supply and you feel the urge to buy even though you didn't want it 5 seconds ago. Someone mentions only a few spots are left and you rush to claim one. A resource that was abundant yesterday feels precious today because now there's not enough for everyone. Your behavior just changed. Not because your need changed. Because the availability did. This is scarcity reactivity. The way perceived scarcity overrides rational decision-making. Scarcity triggers urgency. When resources are limited, your brain shifts into competitive mode. The calm evaluation of whether you actually need something gets replaced by the immediate drive to secure it before someone else does. You're not thinking about value. You're thinking about loss. If you don't get it now, you won't get it at all. And that fear motivates action faster than any rational assessment of need. Your ancestors lived in environments where scarcity was real and frequent. Food shortages, water scarcity, limited access to mates and shelter. When resources were scarce, the individuals who secured them first survived. The ones who hesitated went without. So evolution built you a system that responds to scarcity with immediate action. Grab it now, evaluate later. That system still runs even when the scarcity is artificial. Marketers use it deliberately. Limited time offers. Only a few left in stock. Exclusive access for the first 100 customers. None of it means the product is more valuable. It just means it's framed as scarce. And that framing triggers your scarcity reactivity, making you want it more and think about it less. Scarcity doesn't just affect purchasing decisions. It affects how you treat people. When jobs are scarce, you see other candidates as threats. When attention is limited, you compete for it. When status feels finite, you guard yours and resent others who gain it. Scarcity turns collaboration into competition, because your brain interprets limited resources as a zero-sum game. If they get it, you don't. And scarcity creates hoarding. Not just of objects, but of opportunities, information, connections. When you believe there's not enough to go around, you hold on to everything you have and resist sharing. You're not being selfish. You're being strategic, from the perspective of a survival system designed for a world where scarcity was real and sharing could mean dying. But modern scarcity is mostly perception, not reality. The scarcity of the limited time offer isn't resource scarcity. It's manufactured urgency. The scarcity of exclusive access isn't about supply. It's about status. The scarcity that drives you to compete. Hoard and panic is often a narrative designed to trigger your reactivity, not a reflection of actual limitation. Scarcity reactivity doesn't make you smart. It makes you impulsive. It makes you grab things you don't need, compete when collaboration would serve you better, and treat abundance like scarcity because your nervous system is wired to assume the worst. And in a world that profits from your reactivity, learning to pause and ask whether the scarcity is real might be the most valuable skill you never evolved. Competitive survival mindset. There's one promotion and 5 candidates. You don't just want to succeed. You need the others to fail. There's limited recognition and you're tracking who gets it. Not to celebrate them, but to measure how much less is left for you. You're not just pursuing your goals. You're racing against everyone else pursuing theirs. This is the competitive survival mindset. The belief that success is fight and someone else's win is your loss. It feels rational. There is one promotion. There are limited spots. If they get it, you don't. So competing makes sense. But the mindset doesn't stay contained to genuinely scarce resources. It spreads. You start seeing everything as a competition. Attention, respect, success, happiness. All of it becomes a race where winning means someone else loses and losing means you're left behind. The competitive survival mindset evolved in environments where resources were genuinely limited. Food, mates, status within the group. If someone else secured them, you didn't. So your ancestors who treated life as competition and prioritized outperforming others survived more often than those who didn't. Evolution built you a system that's constantly comparing, constantly calculating your rank, constantly motivated to climb. And that system is still running. You compare your career to your peers, your relationship to your friends, your life to everyone else's carefully curated version. You're not just tracking your own progress. You're measuring it against others. And if they're ahead, it doesn't feel like they're doing well. It feels like you're falling behind. The mindset warps your perception. When you're in competitive mode, other people's success doesn't inspire you. It threatens you. Their achievement becomes evidence that you're not achieving enough. Their happiness becomes a reminder that you're not happy enough. You're not celebrating them. You're recalculating where you stand and whether you're losing ground. And it makes collaboration nearly impossible. When you see others as competition, you can't fully cooperate with them. You hold back information that might give them an edge. You downplay their contributions to protect your own standing. You root for them to struggle, not because you're malicious, but because their struggle means you're relatively better off. The competitive survival mindset doesn't make you cruel. It just makes everyone else's loss feel like your gain. But most of modern life isn't zero-sum. Someone else's success doesn't diminish yours. Their happiness doesn't reduce the happiness available to you. Their achievement doesn't close off your path to achievement. The competition your nervous system is running isn't real. It's a projection, a script designed for a world where resources were finite and winning meant survival. The competitive survival mindset doesn't make you successful. It makes you isolated. Because when you're always competing, you're never connecting. When you're always comparing, you're never content. When you're measuring your worth by your rank, you're trapped in a game where no position ever feels secure because there's always someone ahead of you. And the mindset that was supposed to help you survive just keeps you running a race that has no finish line against people who were never your competition in the first place. Submission for survival. The argument escalates and you feel it happening. Your voice gets quieter. Your posture shrinks. You start agreeing even though you don't. You're not choosing to back down. Your body is making the decision for you, shutting down the fight before you get hurt. This is submission, the survival strategy your nervous system deploys when resistance feels more dangerous than surrender. Submission isn't weakness, it's calculation. When you're facing something bigger, stronger, more powerful, fighting back can get you killed. Submitting signals that you're not a threat, that you accept their dominance, that you're willing to defer. And in the ancestral environment, that signal often meant survival. The wolf that showed its belly didn't get torn apart. The group member who yielded to the alpha didn't get exiled. Submission bought safety by eliminating the need for the dominant party to escalate. Your body knows this. When it detects that you're outmatched, it overrides your impulse to fight and pushes you toward submission instead. Your shoulders round. Your gaze drops. Your voice softens. You're making yourself smaller, less threatening, less worth the effort of crushing. It's automatic, involuntary, and deeply uncomfortable. Because submission doesn't feel like strategy, it feels like defeat. And in modern life, where most conflicts aren't life or death, submission creates long-term damage even when it prevents short-term harm. You submit to a boss who demeans you because confronting them feels too risky. You submit to a partner who controls you because leaving feels more dangerous than staying. You submit in situations where resistance wouldn't actually hurt you, but your nervous system has decided it's safer to surrender. The problem is that submission becomes a pattern. Once your brain learns that submission works, that it reduces immediate threat, it starts defaulting to it. You stop fighting back in situations where you could win. You stop speaking up in moments where your voice matters. You stop asserting boundaries because your system has concluded that yielding is safer than resisting. And every time you submit, you reinforce the pattern. Your nervous system logs it as evidence that submission keeps you safe, even when what it's actually doing is keeping you trapped. Submission also attracts dominance. People who are inclined to control, manipulate, or overpower others can sense submission. They recognize it the way predators recognize prey, and they move toward it. Not because they're evil, but because submission signals that you won't resist, and non-resistance makes exploitation easy. The more you submit, the more you become a target for people who benefit from your surrender. And here's the cruelest part. Submission doesn't actually protect you. It just delays the harm, because the person or system you're submitting to doesn't stop demanding submission. They escalate. They take more. They push harder. And you keep yielding because your nervous system believes that resistance will make things worse. But eventually there's nothing left to yield. And by then, you've lost so much of yourself that standing up feels impossible. Submission made sense when the alternative was death. But in a world where most dominance isn't existential, where you have options, where resistance is possible, submission stops being protection and becomes a cage you've built around yourself. Because the thing keeping you small isn't the threat. It's the belief that you have to stay small to survive. Aggression under threat. Cornered animals attack. Not because they're vicious, because they're terrified. When escape isn't possible and submission feels like death, aggression becomes the only option left. That same response lives in you. You've seen it before. Someone pushes too far and you snap. Not in a calculated way, in a way that surprises even you. The intensity, the anger, the willingness to escalate beyond what the situation warrants. You're not thinking. You're reacting. Because your nervous system has concluded that you're trapped, and the only way out is through force. Aggression under threat is different from ordinary aggression. It's not about dominance. It's not about winning. It's about survival. Your brain has determined that you're in danger, that you can't run, that yielding will get you destroyed. So it mobilizes every resource you have and pushes you to fight, even when the odds are against you, even when fighting makes things worse. The response is disproportionate by design. When you're cornered, holding back is suicide. So your system doesn't hold back. It floods you with adrenaline. It removes inhibitions. It makes you willing to do damage, to escalate, to go further than you normally would. Because in a true survival situation, restraint gets you killed. Overwhelming force gives you a chance. But modern threats don't require overwhelming force. And deploying it anyway creates consequences that outlast the threat. You lash out at someone who didn't deserve it. You say things you can't take back. You damage relationships that mattered. You escalate conflicts that could have been resolved. Not because you're a bad person, but because your nervous system treated the situation as life or death and responded accordingly. And by the time you realize the threat wasn't that serious, the damage is already done. Aggression under threat also reveals itself in less obvious ways. Passive aggression when direct confrontation feels too risky. Sabotage when open resistance feels impossible. Explosive reactions to minor provocations because you've been feeling cornered for so long that anything feels like the final straw. You're not choosing aggression. You're being driven to it by a system that believes you're out of options. And the worst part is that aggression under threat often confirms the very fears that triggered it. You attack because you feel threatened, and your attack makes you threatening. People pull away. Relationships break. Opportunities close. And your nervous system logs all of it as evidence that you were right to feel cornered, which makes you more likely to react with aggression next time. The cycle reinforces itself. Aggression under threat isn't wrong. There are situations where it's necessary, where standing your ground with force is the only thing that keeps you safe. But most modern conflicts aren't those situations. And treating every moment of pressure like a corner you have to fight your way out of doesn't protect you. It just ensures that you're always fighting, always escalating, always reacting like your survival is on the line when most of the time it's not. The escape urgency. The conversation feels wrong and you need to leave. Now. Not in 5 minutes, not after you finish your sentence. Now. The urge is overwhelming, irrational, impossible to ignore. You don't know why you need to get out. You just know you can't stay. This is escape urgency. The drive to flee that overrides everything else. It's faster than thought. Your body decides you need to leave before your brain understands why. Your heart pounds. Your breathing quickens. Your muscles tense, ready to move. The environment that felt fine a moment ago now feels suffocating, dangerous, unbearable. You need distance. You need air. You need out. Escape urgency evolved because speed mattered. When a predator appeared, the individuals who hesitated to assess the threat got eaten. The ones who ran immediately survived. So evolution built you a system that doesn't wait for confirmation. It detects a cue that might signal danger and triggers the urge to flee. Fast. Overwhelming. Non-negotiable. That system is still active. And it fires at things that aren't predators. A social situation that feels too intense. A conversation that's getting too personal. A conflict that's escalating. A moment of vulnerability that feels too exposed. Your escape urgency kicks in, and suddenly you need to be anywhere but here. You're not making a rational decision to leave. You're being driven out by a survival response that's treating discomfort like danger. The problem is that escape urgency doesn't wait for you to handle things properly. It doesn't care about social norms, responsibilities, or consequences. It just wants you gone. So you leave mid-conversation. You cancel plans at the last second. You withdraw from situations that matter because staying feels intolerable. And you don't have a good explanation because the urgency doesn't come with one. You just know you had to get out. And once you're out, the urgency fades. The relief is immediate. You escaped. You're safe. Your nervous system logs the escape as successful, which makes it more likely to trigger the same response next time. But the situation you fled didn't resolve. The conversation didn't finish. The relationship didn't repair. You escaped the discomfort, but you left the problem intact. And now it's bigger, because your sudden exit added another layer of complication. Escape urgency also erodes trust. People don't understand why you left. They interpret it as rejection, avoidance, lack of commitment. You want to explain that it wasn't about them, that you just couldn't stay. But that explanation doesn't make sense to someone who's never felt the overwhelming need to flee a situation that looked perfectly safe. So they stop inviting you. They stop opening up. They stop counting on you to stay. And your world shrinks, not because people pushed you out, but because you kept running. The urgency isn't wrong when the danger is real. But when it fires at discomfort instead of threat, at vulnerability instead of harm, at intimacy instead of risk, it doesn't protect you. It just keeps you isolated. Because every time you flee, you reinforce the belief that staying is dangerous. And eventually, everywhere starts to feel like somewhere you need to escape from. Shelter seeking. The world feels too big, too loud, too much. You retreat. To your room, your car, your bed. Somewhere small, enclosed, controllable. You're not hiding. You're sheltering. Finding a space where the overwhelm can't reach you. Shelter seeking is one of your most basic survival instincts. When the environment feels hostile, you find cover. Your ancestors sought caves, dense foliage, elevated ground. Anywhere that offered protection from predators, weather, danger. The instinct to find shelter and stay there until the threat passed kept them alive. And that instinct is still running in you. But the threats you're sheltering from now aren't predators. They're people. Responsibilities. Demands. The pressure of existing in a world that expects you to be present, functional, available. And when that pressure becomes too much, your system pushes you to find shelter. To withdraw into a space where no one can reach you, where nothing is expected, where you can just exist without performing. Shelter-seeking feels like relief. The moment you close the door, the overwhelm starts to ease. You're alone, you're safe. You don't have to manage anyone's expectations or navigate social dynamics or make decisions. You can just be small and still and hidden. It's not laziness, it's recovery. Your nervous system is restoring itself in the only environment it feels safe enough to let its guard down. But shelter seeking becomes a problem when the shelter stops being temporary. When you start spending more time in hiding than engaging. When the world outside your safe space starts to feel increasingly threatening, not because it's gotten more dangerous, but because you've gotten less practiced at navigating it. Every day you spend sheltered is another day you're not building tolerance for discomfort, not practicing engagement, not learning that you can handle the world even when it's overwhelming. And the longer you shelter, the harder it becomes to leave. Your safe space becomes your only space. The idea of going out, facing people, handling responsibilities feels insurmountable. Not because the tasks are objectively difficult, but because your system has recalibrated. What used to feel manageable now feels dangerous. Your threshold for threat has dropped so low that ordinary life triggers your shelter-seeking response. Shelter-seeking also isolates you. People stop reaching out because you're always unavailable. Opportunities pass because you're not present to take them. Relationships fade because connection requires showing up, and you're always sheltering. You're not rejecting the world. You're just protecting yourself from it. But the protection has turned into a prison where the walls are made of comfort, and the lock is your own nervous system telling you that leaving isn't safe. Shelter seeking isn't wrong. Everyone needs a place to retreat, to recover, to be alone. But when your shelter becomes your world, when retreating becomes your default response to discomfort, when you're spending more time hiding than living, the shelter isn't protecting you anymore. It's just keeping you small. And the longer you stay, the smaller the world outside becomes, until eventually, there's nowhere left that feels safe except the space you've been hiding in all along. Social attachment as survival mechanism. You feel better when they're around. Calmer. Safer. Like the world is slightly less overwhelming when they're beside you. It's not romance. It's not dependence. It's something deeper. A nervous system recognizing that this person makes survival feel more possible. This is social attachment as survival, the drive to bond with people who increase your chances of staying alive. Humans didn't survive alone. Isolated individuals got picked off by predators, starved when they couldn't hunt large game, died from injuries that would have been survivable with help. Your ancestors lived in groups because groups meant safety, resources, protection, care. And evolution built you a system that motivates you to form and maintain those bonds. Not through logic, but through feeling. The right people make you feel safe. And feeling safe makes you want to stay close. That's why social attachment is so powerful. It's not just preference. It's survival wiring. When you attach to someone, your nervous system treats them as essential to your well-being. Being near them lowers your stress. Being separated from them triggers anxiety. It's not weakness. It's biology recognizing that this person is part of your survival strategy. But that same mechanism creates vulnerability. Because once you're attacked, your system treats threats to the attachment as threats to your survival. The possibility of losing them doesn't just feel sad. It feels dangerous. Like losing access to resources you can't survive without. So you cling. You compromise. You tolerate behavior you shouldn't tolerate because your nervous system has decided that losing this person is more dangerous than staying in a situation that hurts you. Social attachment also makes you easy to control. When someone becomes central to your nervous system's sense of safety, they gain power over you. They can withdraw, and your system panics. They can threaten to leave, and you'll do almost anything to make them stay. It's not manipulation on your part. It's survival desperation. Your attachment system is telling you that losing them means losing safety, and your behavior adjusts accordingly. And attachment doesn't always go to the people who are actually safe. Sometimes it goes to the ones who are familiar, the ones who match patterns your nervous system learned early. Even when those patterns are harmful, you attach to people who hurt you because your system confuses familiarity with safety. You stay in relationships that damage you because leaving triggers the attachment system's alarm, and that alarm feels like a threat to survival, even when leaving is the thing that would actually keep you safe. Social attachment isn't wrong. Connection is essential. Bonding is healthy. But when your survival feels contingent on one person, when losing them feels like losing everything, when your nervous system has fused your well-being to their presence, attachment stops being connection and becomes dependence. And dependence gives other people power over your sense of safety that they shouldn't have. Because your survival doesn't actually require them. It just feels like it does. And that feeling, left unchecked, can keep you bound to people who should have been let go a long time ago. Touch seeking under distress. You're upset and you reach for them. Not for conversation. Not for advice. Just for contact. A hug, a hand, closeness. The touch doesn't solve anything, but it helps. It makes the distress feel slightly more bearable, the world slightly less overwhelming. This is touch seeking under distress. The drive to find physical contact when you're hurting. It's one of your earliest survival mechanisms. Infants who were held survived. Infants who weren't didn't. Physical contact from caregivers meant warmth, food, protection, care. Touch was survival. And your nervous system learned, before you had language, before you had conscious thought, that when you're in distress, seeking touch increases your chances of getting the help you need to survive. That drive doesn't disappear as you age. When you're overwhelmed, your nervous system still pushes you toward contact. Not because you're childish, but because touch regulates your stress response in ways nothing else can. Physical contact with someone you trust lowers cortisol. It releases oxytocin. It signals to your nervous system that you're not alone, that you're safe, that you don't have to manage the distress by yourself. Touch under distress isn't about romance or sexuality. It's about regulation. Your nervous system is dysregulated, overwhelmed, struggling. And touch, particularly from someone whose presence feels safe, helps bring it back to baseline. It's co-regulation. Their calm system helps stabilize your activated one. Not through words or logic, but through proximity and contact. But not everyone has access to safe touch. And when you're in distress and there's no one to reach for, the need doesn't go away. It just sits there unmet, compounding the overwhelm. You're dealing with the original distress plus the additional distress of facing it alone. Your nervous system is screaming for contact and getting nothing. And that lack, over time, teaches you that seeking comfort is pointless, that you're on your own, that distress is something you have to endure in isolation. Touch seeking can also become complicated when the people you reach for aren't safe. When the person you turn to for comfort is also the person causing your distress. Your system seeks touch from them because they're familiar, because attachment has wired you to seek regulation from them, because you don't have anyone else. But receiving touch from someone who hurts you doesn't regulate your nervous system. It confuses it. You're getting the signal that you're safe from the same person who makes you unsafe. And that confusion keeps you trapped in a cycle where you keep returning to the source of harm because it's also your source of comfort. Touch seeking under distress is healthy. It's connection. It's co-regulation. It's your nervous system doing exactly what it's designed to do when overwhelmed. But when that seeking goes unmet, or when it goes to people who shouldn't be providing comfort, the mechanism that's supposed to help you recover becomes another source of pain. Because the need for touch doesn't go away just because safe touch isn't available. It just stays there, unmet, aching, reminding you that you're facing everything alone. Calming co-regulation. Someone sits beside you while you're anxious, and without saying anything, you start to feel steadier. Their presence doesn't solve the problem. They're not giving advice. They're just there, calm, and somehow that calm transfers to you. Your breathing slows. Your heart rate drops. The panic that felt unbearable a moment ago becomes manageable. That's co-regulation. Your nervous system borrowing stability from theirs. You can't always regulate yourself. When you're overwhelmed, when your stress response is maxed out, your internal resources aren't enough to bring you back to baseline. You need external regulation. And the most powerful source of that regulation is another person whose nervous system is calm. Co-regulation works through proximity. Just being near someone who's regulated helps regulate you. Your nervous systems sync. Their steady breathing cues yours to slow. Their relaxed posture signals safety to your body. Their calm presence tells your system that the threat level is lower than it feels. You're not consciously copying them. Your nervous system is automatically adjusting to match theirs. This is why panic attacks ease when someone sits with you quietly. Why overwhelmed children calm in the arms of a calm parent. Why being around certain people makes stress feel less crushing. They're not fixing anything. They're lending you their regulation until yours comes back online. But co-regulation requires the other person to actually be calm. If they're anxious too, if they're matching your panic instead of offering steadiness, co-regulation doesn't happen. Instead, you both escalate. Their nervous system picks up your activation, which increases theirs, which increases yours. You're amplifying each other's distress instead of dampening it. And co-regulation only works if you feel safe with the person. If you don't trust them, if their presence triggers defensiveness, if you're worried about how they'll judge your distress, your system won't sync with theirs. It'll stay guarded. You can't borrow regulation from someone your nervous system doesn't trust. The absence of co-regulation is one of the loneliest experiences. When you're overwhelmed and there's no one whose calm you can borrow, when everyone around you is just as activated as you are, when you have to ride out the distress alone, it takes longer to recover. And the longer you spend without access to co-regulation, the more your system learns that it's on its own. That when things get bad, there's no external support to lean on. And that learning makes it harder to reach for co-regulation even when it becomes available, because your system has stopped expecting it. Co-regulation isn't dependence. It's how nervous systems are designed to work. You're not supposed to manage everything alone. You're supposed to be able to borrow stability from people you trust when your own runs out. And they're supposed to be able to borrow from you when theirs does, because survival was never individual. It was always collective. And your nervous system still knows that. Panic contagion. Someone screams and runs. You don't see the threat. You don't know what's happening. But your body moves before your mind catches up. You're running too. Not because you've assessed the danger. Because everyone else is running, and that's enough. This is panic contagion. The way fear spreads through groups faster than information. Your ancestors survived by paying attention to the group's alarm signals. If one person spotted a predator and bolted, the people who stopped to ask questions got eaten. The ones who ran first and figured it out later survived. So evolution built you a system that treats other people's panic as your panic. When someone near you displays fear, your nervous system doesn't wait for confirmation. It activates. Immediately. Panic contagion doesn't require understanding. You can be completely calm, and someone else's terror will trigger yours. Their wide eyes, their rapid breathing, their sudden movement. Your system reads those cues as threat signals and responds. Not to the actual danger, but to their reaction. You're not making a conscious choice to panic. You're being infected by their fear, and it spreads fast. One person panics, the people near them catch it, and suddenly the whole group is in flight mode. No one knows what started it. No one can articulate the threat. But everyone's running, pushing, trying to get away from something they can't identify. The panic has become self-sustaining. It doesn't need a real threat anymore. The group's reaction is the threat. This is how stampedes happen. How crowds crush people trying to exit through doors that aren't actually blocked. How riots escalate from tension into violence without anyone being able to explain how it started. Panic contagion overrides rational assessment. Once it takes hold, the group moves as one panicked organism, and individual judgment shuts down. The contagion is worse in confined spaces, in crowds, in situations where escape routes are limited. When your nervous system detects panic in others and also detects that you're trapped, the combination triggers maximum alarm. You're not just catching their fear. You're amplifying it with your own, and everyone around you is doing the same. Panic contagion also makes you vulnerable to manipulation. Because if someone can trigger panic in a few people, the contagion will spread to everyone else. They don't need to convince the whole group there's a threat. They just need to activate a few nervous systems, and biology does the rest. The panic spreads, the group reacts, and by the time people realize there was no real danger, the damage is already done. Resisting panic contagion requires something your nervous system wasn't built for, pausing to assess before reacting. Seeing someone panic and choosing not to mirror it. Staying calm while everyone around you is losing control. It's not natural. It's not easy. But it's the only way to break the contagion before it turns a group into a mob. Food hoarding psychology. The news mentions possible shortages and suddenly you're buying more than you need. Not because you're actually worried about starving. Because not having enough feels unbearable. You're filling your pantry, your freezer, your cabinets. More than you'll use. More than makes sense. But having it there feels essential. This is food hoarding. The drive to stockpile resources when scarcity feels imminent. Food hoarding is hardwired. Your ancestors faced real food shortages. Droughts, failed harvests, seasonal scarcity. The ones who stored extra when food was available survived the lean times. The ones who didn't starved. So evolution built you a system that responds to any hint of scarcity by driving you to accumulate. Not just enough. More than enough. Because in a world where food could disappear without warning, excess was insurance. That system activates even when the scarcity isn't real. A rumor of shortages. A news story about supply chains. A perceived threat that food might become unavailable. Your nervous system doesn't verify whether the threat is credible. It just registers the possibility and pushes you to hoard. Grab it now. Store it. Make sure you won't go without. And once you start hoarding, it's hard to stop. Because having the stockpile doesn't ease the anxiety. It just creates new anxiety about maintaining it. What if it's not enough? What if you need more? What if the shortage lasts longer than you planned for? The hoarding that was supposed to create security just creates more fear about losing that security. Food hoarding also triggers competition. When everyone's hoarding, when shelves start emptying because people are buying more than they need, it confirms the fear that drove the hoarding in the first place. You see others stockpiling and your system interprets it as proof that scarcity is real. So you hoard more. And your hoarding makes others hoard more. The cycle feeds itself until the scarcity that everyone was afraid of becomes real, not because resources actually ran out, but because hoarding behavior created the shortage. And hoarding doesn't stop at food. It spreads to anything your brain categorizes as essential. Toilet paper, medicine, fuel. The logic is the same. If there might not be enough, get more now. If others are taking it, take more before it's gone. The instinct that evolved to protect you from starvation now fires at anything that feels like it could run out, regardless of whether you actually need it. Food hoarding isn't irrational. It's a survival response designed for a world where scarcity was common and deadly. But in a world where most scarcity is temporary, localized, or entirely manufactured, hoarding creates the very problem it's trying to prevent. Because when everyone's grabbing more than they need, The people who actually need it can't get it. And the system designed to keep you from starving ends up creating scarcity where none existed. Defensive aggression. They criticized you and you came back hard. Harder than necessary. Not with a measured response, but with an attack. You weren't trying to have a conversation. You were defending yourself the only way your nervous system knows how, by going on offense. Defensive aggression isn't about winning an argument. It's about eliminating a perceived threat through force. Your brain treats criticism, rejection, and social attacks the same way it treats physical threats. Someone questions your competence, and your system registers it as an assault on your status, your value, your position in the group. And when your status feels threatened, your survival instinct kicks in. Not because status is survival in the modern world, but because it was in the ancestral one. Low status meant less access to resources, mates, protection. It meant vulnerability. So threats to status trigger defensive responses as intense as threats to physical safety. Defensive aggression is disproportionate by design. When you're defending, you don't match the threat. You exceed it. You don't just deflect the criticism. You attack the person who delivered it. You don't just disagree. You discredit, diminish, destroy. Because in your nervous system's calculation, anything less than overwhelming force leaves you vulnerable to further attack. But defensive aggression in social situations doesn't eliminate threats. It creates them. You lash out at someone who criticized you, and now they're not just critical. They're hostile. You attack someone who questioned you, and now you've made an enemy where there might have been a colleague. You defend yourself with such intensity that the people around you stop engaging with you honestly, because honesty feels dangerous. And defensive aggression becomes a pattern. Once your system learns that attacking works to shut down criticism, it starts deploying that strategy automatically. Someone offers feedback and you respond with hostility before you've even processed what they said. Someone disagrees and you treat it as a challenge that needs to be crushed. You're not choosing aggression. Your defense system is choosing it for you. The cruelest part is that defensive aggression often targets the people who mean you no harm. A partner points out something that hurt them, and you respond like they're attacking you. A friend offers a gentle observation, and you shut them down with disproportionate force. The people who care about you learn that honesty costs too much, so they stop being honest. And you're left surrounded by people who won't tell you the truth, because your defensive aggression has made truth-telling feel like walking into a war zone. Defensive aggression doesn't protect you. It isolates you. Because the people who would help you grow, who would offer you honest feedback, who would engage with you authentically, stop trying. And the only people left are the ones who either don't care enough to be honest, or who are willing to match your aggression with their own. Either way, you lose the thing defensive aggression was supposed to protect, your place in the group. You just drive away everyone who would have helped you keep it. Risk calibration failure. Should you cross the street now or wait? The car is far enough. Probably. Or is it? You hesitate. You calculate. You second guess. It's a simple decision, but your system is treating it like life or death. And by the time you decide it's safe, you've missed the window and now you're waiting for the next gap. This is risk calibration failure. When your nervous system can't accurately assess how dangerous something actually is. Risk calibration is supposed to help you navigate the world safely. Your brain evaluates threats and assigns them a risk level. High risk, avoid. Low risk, proceed. The system works when it's properly calibrated. But when it's not, when your threat detection is too sensitive or not sensitive enough, you either freeze at everything or charge into actual danger. Overcalibration makes everything feel risky. Crossing the street. Sending an email. Starting a conversation. Your system has turned the sensitivity up so high that ordinary activities register as threats. You're stuck in analysis paralysis, weighing risks that aren't actually significant, unable to move forward because every option feels dangerous. This happens after trauma. After being hurt in situations you thought were safe, your system recalibrates to assume nothing is safe until proven otherwise. The threshold for what counts as risky drops so low that normal life becomes a minefield. You're not being overly cautious. Your nervous system genuinely believes that the risk level is high, so it keeps you frozen, waiting for certainty that never comes. Under-calibration is the opposite problem. Your system has turned the sensitivity down so far that actual risks don't register. You walk into dangerous situations because your threat detection isn't firing. You take reckless chances because your brain isn't flagging the danger. It's not bravery. It's a broken calibration system that's failing to protect you from real harm. Both failures create problems. Over-calibration keeps you trapped in safety that's actually stagnation. You're not taking necessary risks. You're not growing. You're not engaging with life because your system has decided that anything uncertain is dangerous. Under-calibration gets you hurt. You're ignoring warning signs, dismissing red flags, walking into situations that are genuinely harmful because your system isn't registering the threat. And recalibrating is hard because your nervous system resists it. If you're over-calibrated, every attempt to take a risk feels like you're overriding your survival instinct. If you're under-calibrated, acknowledging danger feels like admitting weakness. Either way, your system fights to maintain its current setting, even when that setting is making your life worse. Risk calibration failure doesn't just affect big decisions. It affects everything. Whether to speak up, whether to try something new, whether to trust someone, whether to leave a situation that's hurting you. When your calibration is off, you can't trust your own assessment. And without accurate risk assessment, you're either paralyzed by fear or blind to danger. Neither keeps you safe. One just keeps you stuck and the other keeps you exposed. False alarm response. The door slams and you're on your feet, heart pounding, ready to run. Then you realize it was just the wind. Nothing was wrong, but your body already reacted like it was. This is the false alarm response, when your threat detection fires at things that aren't threats. False alarms are built into the system. Your nervous system is designed to err on the side of caution. It's better to react to 100 false alarms than to miss one real threat. In the wild, the cost of a false alarm was minimal. You jumped at a sound that turned out to be nothing. You wasted a few seconds of energy. No big deal. But the cost of missing a real threat was death. So your system is tuned to be oversensitive. It detects patterns that might indicate danger and fires the alarm before confirming whether the threat is real. A shadow becomes a predator. A noise becomes an intruder. A moment of silence becomes abandonment. Your body reacts first. Your brain sorts out the reality later. The problem is that modern life is full of stimuli that trigger false alarms. Sudden noises that aren't dangerous. Unexpected movements that aren't attacks. Ambiguous social cues that aren't rejection. Your system fires constantly, flooding you with adrenaline, preparing you for threats that never materialize. And every false alarm costs you. Because false alarms aren't free. Each one activates your stress response. Your heart rate spikes. Your cortisol rises. Your body prepares for action. And even though you realize a moment later that there was no threat, the activation doesn't disappear instantly. It lingers. Your system stays elevated. And if the false alarms keep coming, if you're constantly being triggered by things that turn out to be harmless, you never fully come down. You're living in a state of chronic activation, exhausted by a threat detection system that won't stop crying wolf. And chronic false alarms train you to ignore real ones. When your system is always firing, when every alarm turns out to be nothing, you start tuning them out. You stop reacting. You dismiss the signals because most of them have been wrong. And that's when you miss the real threat. Because your system has cried wolf so many times that when the wolf actually shows up, you don't believe the alarm. False alarm response also damages relationships. You react to perceived threats in your partner's tone, their expression, their behavior. You respond with defensiveness, withdrawal, or aggression to things they didn't mean as attacks. And when they tell you it was a false alarm, that they weren't criticizing you or pulling away or losing interest, you've already reacted. The damage is done, and over time, they learn that interacting with you means constantly triggering false alarms, so they start being more careful, more distant, more guarded, which your system reads as confirmation that the threat was real all along. False alarms can't be eliminated. Your nervous system will always err toward caution. But when every alarm feels like an emergency, when you're reacting to shadows and wind and misread cues like they're real threats, the system designed to protect you just keeps you in a constant state of emergency. And a body that's always preparing for danger is a body that never gets to rest. Habituation to threat. The first time the neighbor's dog barked at night, you woke up startled. The 10th time, you barely noticed. By the 100th time, you slept right through it. The threat didn't disappear. You just stopped reacting to it. That's habituation. Your nervous system's way of conserving resources by tuning out repeated stimuli that don't result in harm. Habituation is efficient. If every alarm triggered the same intense response every time, you'd be exhausted. So your system learns. When a stimulus appears repeatedly and nothing bad happens, your brain downgrades it from threat to background noise. The barking dog, the traffic outside, the flickering light. All of it fades into the backdrop because your nervous system has concluded it's not worth the energy to keep reacting. This is adaptive when the stimulus is genuinely harmless. It lets you function in environments that would otherwise keep you in constant alert mode. You habituate to city noise, to crowded spaces, to minor irritations, and that habituation frees up mental resources for actual threats. But habituation doesn't distinguish between harmless annoyances and real dangers you've just gotten used to. When something genuinely threatening appears repeatedly without immediate consequence, your system habituates to that too. The abusive partner who explodes regularly. The toxic work environment that grinds you down daily. The chronic stress that's damaging your health. Your nervous system stops sounding the alarm not because the threat is gone, but because the alarm has been ringing so long that your brain has learned to ignore it. And that's when habituation becomes dangerous. You're not safer. You're just desensitized. The threat is still there, still causing harm, but your system has recategorized it as normal. So you stay in situations that are slowly destroying you because your threat response has gone quiet. You've habituated to danger. Habituation also makes it hard to recognize when things are getting worse. Because the change is gradual, because each small escalation happens against a backdrop you've already habituated to, your system doesn't register the increase in threat level. The abuse gets worse, but you've habituated to the baseline. The stress compounds, but you've habituated to being overwhelmed. By the time you realize how bad it's gotten, you're so deeply habituated that what would have been intolerable at the start now feels normal. And breaking habituation is difficult because your nervous system resists it. You've adapted to the threat. Leaving means facing the unknown, and your system has learned to treat the known threat as manageable. So you stay not because it's safe, but because habituation has made it feel survivable. Even when it's not. Stress-induced tunnel vision. You're overwhelmed and suddenly all you can see is the immediate problem. Everything else fades. The bigger picture, the context, the other options, they're still there, but your brain has narrowed its focus down to a single point. It's not a choice. It's your stress response cutting away everything that isn't the immediate threat. This is tunnel vision, the narrowing of attention that happens under high stress. Tunnel vision is designed for emergencies. When a predator attacks, You don't need to think about your long-term goals or consider multiple perspectives. You need to focus on the threat in front of you and deal with it. Now! So your brain shuts down peripheral awareness and locks onto the immediate danger. Everything else becomes irrelevant. That focus is powerful when the threat is real and singular. It lets you act fast, react decisively, pour all your resources into handling the crisis. But modern stress doesn't work that way. Most of your stressors aren't discrete threats you can fight or flee. They're complex, ongoing, interconnected. And tunnel vision doesn't help with complexity. It just makes you blind to it. When you're stressed about money, tunnel vision makes you focus on the immediate shortage and miss the patterns that created it. When you're stressed in a relationship, you fixate on the current fight and lose sight of the larger dynamic. When you're stressed at work, you obsess over the task in front of you and ignore the systemic issues making everything harder. The stress that's supposed to help you solve problems is actually making you worse at solving them because it's eliminating your ability to see the full picture. Tunnel vision also distorts your perception of options. When your focus narrows, so does your sense of what's possible. You can't see alternatives because your brain has decided there's only one thing that matters. So you keep doing the same thing over and over, even when it's not working, because tunnel vision has convinced you there's no other option. You're not being stubborn. You're being cognitively constrained by a stress response that's eliminated everything except the narrow path directly in front of you. And the worst part is that tunnel vision makes stress self-perpetuating. You can't see the broader solutions because you're too focused on the immediate crisis. So the crisis doesn't resolve, which keeps you stressed, which keeps you in tunnel vision. The cycle locks you in place, unable to step back and see that the way forward isn't through the narrow tunnel your stress has created. It's somewhere to the side, in the peripheral vision your system has shut down. Breaking tunnel vision requires forcing yourself to widen the lens when everything in you is screaming to narrow it. To step back when your instinct is to lean in. To ask what you're missing when your brain is convinced you're seeing everything that matters. Because tunnel vision isn't clarity. It's blindness disguised as focus. And what it's making you blind to might be exactly what you need to see. Survival mode thinking. You're making decisions you know are short-sighted. Choices that solve the immediate problem but create bigger ones later. You're not stupid. You see what you're doing. But you can't seem to stop because right now is screaming louder than later, and survival mode doesn't think past today. Survival mode thinking is your brain's emergency protocol. When resources are scarce, when threat is high, when you're just trying to make it through, your cognitive horizon shrinks. Planning for the future becomes impossible because the future doesn't exist until you survive the present. In true emergencies, this makes sense. If you're starving, you eat what's available now. You don't save it for next week because next week doesn't matter if you die today. If you're being chased, you run to the nearest shelter. You don't evaluate whether it's the optimal long-term hiding spot. Survival mode prioritizes immediate relief over future benefit because immediate threats demand immediate solutions. But survival mode doesn't turn off when the crisis becomes chronic. When you're living paycheck to paycheck, decision after decision gets made in survival mode. You can't save because saving means not eating today. You can't invest in your future because your future is getting through this month. You're not being irresponsible. You're being rational within the constraints survival mode has imposed. The problem is that those constraints keep you trapped in the cycle that created them. Survival mode thinking also shows up in relationships. You stay in situations that are damaging long-term because leaving feels impossible right now. You avoid conversations that need to happen because the immediate discomfort outweighs the long-term benefit. You make choices that keep the peace today even though they guarantee bigger conflict tomorrow. You're not choosing poorly. Your choosing from a menu survival mode has reduced to a single option: get through this moment. And survival mode doesn't just narrow your options. It changes how you evaluate them. Long-term consequences feel abstract, hypothetical, distant. Immediate consequences feel concrete and urgent. So you make the trade every time. Future you will deal with the fallout. Present you just needs to survive. The cruelty is that survival mode thinking creates the conditions that keep you in survival mode. Every short-term decision that sacrifices the future makes the future harder, which keeps you in crisis, which keeps you in survival mode. You're trapped in a cognitive state designed for temporary emergencies, running it as a permanent operating system. And the longer you run it, the harder it becomes to think your way out, because thinking beyond survival requires resources survival mode won't let you access. Breaking survival mode thinking doesn't mean ignoring immediate needs. It means creating enough stability that your brain can afford to think past today. Because as long as you're in crisis, as long as survival feels uncertain, your cognitive system won't let you plan for a future it's not sure you'll have. And without that future planning, the crisis never ends. Emergency decision narrowing. The building's on fire and you see two exits. One's closer but unfamiliar. One's farther, but it's the one you always use. You head for the familiar one, not because it's the better choice. Because under pressure, your brain defaulted to the known path, even when the unknown one would have gotten you out faster. This is emergency decision narrowing. The way stress eliminates options and pushes you toward familiar responses, even when they're not optimal. Decision narrowing happens because evaluating options takes time and mental resources. In a genuine emergency, you don't have either. So your brain shortcuts the process. It scans for the most familiar, most practiced response and executes it. No deliberation, no comparison, no creativity. Just the default action your system has done before. When the familiar response is the right one, this saves your life. If you've practiced fire drills, if you've trained for emergencies, if you've built the right habits, your narrowed decision-making will guide you to safety. But if the familiar response is wrong, if the situation demands something new, if the default action doesn't fit the actual threat, you're in trouble. Because your brain won't let you explore alternatives. It's locked onto the known path, even when that path leads nowhere. Emergency decision narrowing doesn't just happen in life or death situations. It happens anytime stress spikes. You're in a heated argument and you fall back on the same defensive patterns, even though they've never worked. You're facing a deadline and you default to the same inefficient process, even though you know there's a better way. You're overwhelmed and you reach for the same coping mechanisms, even when they're making things worse. You're not choosing these responses. Your stress is choosing them for you, narrowing your decision space down to whatever's most familiar. And the more stressed you are, the more your decisions narrow. Under extreme stress, you're not choosing between options. You're executing the one pattern your brain has defaulted to. That's why people freeze in emergencies. Why they keep doing the same thing even as it fails. Why they can't think of solutions that would be obvious if they were calm. The narrowing isn't just limiting their choices. It's eliminating their ability to see that choices exist. Decision narrowing also makes you predictable. Once someone knows your default responses, they know how you'll react under pressure. They can create stress and watch you narrow into the pattern they expect. You're not weak. You're just operating under the same cognitive constraints everyone operates under when their system decides there's no time to think. Breaking emergency decision narrowing requires practice when you're not under pressure, building new responses, practicing alternatives, creating multiple default paths so that even when your brain narrows, it's narrowing towards something that works. Because you can't think your way out of decision narrowing in the moment. By the time stress hits, the narrowing has already happened. The only thing that changes the outcome is what you've built into your automatic responses before the emergency began. Reactive impulsivity. Someone criticizes you and before you can think, you've responded. Not with a measured reply. With the first thing that came to mind. You see an opportunity and you grab it without evaluating whether it's actually good for you. You feel an urge and you act on it immediately, consequences ignored. This is reactive impulsivity. Action without deliberation, driven by immediate stimulus rather than thoughtful choice. Reactive impulsivity is your brain's fast track. When speed matters more than accuracy, when hesitation could mean missing the opportunity or failing to defend yourself, your system bypasses deliberation and goes straight to action. See threat, respond. See reward, pursue. See opening, take it. It's efficient. It's fast. And it's often wrong, because most situations don't actually require instant response. The criticism doesn't need to be answered immediately. The opportunity isn't going to vanish in the next 5 seconds. The urge doesn't have to be acted on right now. But your reactive system doesn't know that. It just knows stimulus appeared and action is required. So it acts. And you're left dealing with the consequences of a decision you didn't actually make, because your impulsivity made it for you. Reactive impulsivity gets worse under stress. When you're already activated, when your system is primed for threat, when your resources are depleted, you lose the ability to pause between stimulus and response. Everything becomes a trigger that demands immediate reaction. Someone looks at you wrong and you're snapping back. An email arrives and you're firing off a reply before you've read it properly. A feeling hits, and you're acting on it before you've identified what it is. You're not choosing impulsivity. Your stressed system is defaulting to it because deliberation feels impossible. And impulsivity creates its own problems that compound the stress. You say things you regret. You make commitments you can't keep. You burn bridges you needed. You chase rewards that turn out to be traps. Each impulsive action creates fallout that increases your stress, which makes you more impulsive, which creates more fallout. The cycle feeds itself until you're living in constant damage control, managing the consequences of reactions you didn't mean to have. Reactive impulsivity also makes you easy to manipulate. If someone knows how to trigger your reactive responses, they can get you to act against your own interests. They push your buttons and watch you react predictably, impulsively in ways that serve them and hurt you. You're not weak. You're just operating on a hair trigger, and anyone who knows where the trigger is can pull it. Breaking reactive impulsivity doesn't mean eliminating quick responses. It means building in a pause between stimulus and action, a moment to ask whether this requires immediate reaction or whether you can afford to think. It's not natural. It's not easy, because your reactive system evolved to protect you from situations where thinking too long meant dying. But in a world where most stimuli aren't life-threatening, where most reactions can wait, where most opportunities don't disappear in seconds, impulsivity stops being protection and becomes the thing you need protection from. Recovery from threat mode. The crisis is over. The argument ended. The deadline passed. The danger is gone. But your body hasn't gotten the message. Your heart is still pounding. Your muscles are still tense. Your mind is still racing. You know you're safe now, but you don't feel safe, and you don't know how to get back. This is the recovery gap, the space between when the threat ends and when your nervous system finally stands down. Recovery isn't automatic. Your system doesn't have an off switch. It has a gradual de-escalation process that takes time. After activation, after flooding with adrenaline and cortisol, after mobilizing for fight or flight, your body needs to metabolize those chemicals, recalibrate your nervous system, return to baseline. And that process is slow. Slower than the activation. Slower than you want. Slower than feels reasonable when you're sitting there knowing the threat is gone but still feeling like you're in danger. and some threats don't allow recovery time. You're still keyed up from one crisis when the next one hits. Your system never gets the chance to return to baseline, so you're operating from an already elevated state when the new activation happens. Each stressor stacks on top of the last. Your baseline keeps rising, until eventually you're chronically activated, living in a state where threat mode is no longer the exception. It's your default. Recovery also requires the right conditions. You need safety. You need rest. You need time away from stimulation. But modern life doesn't provide that. You finish one thing and immediately start another. You resolve one conflict and walk straight into the next. You're expected to go from crisis to normal functioning without the buffer your nervous system needs to make that transition. So you don't recover. You just keep operating in threat mode, running on fumes, wondering why you can't relax even when nothing's actively going wrong. And the longer you stay in threat mode, the harder it becomes to leave it. Your system starts treating activation as normal. It recalibrates. What used to be your emergency state becomes your baseline. And once that happens, actual recovery starts to feel wrong. Relaxation feels like vulnerability. Calm feels like you're missing something. Your system has been in threat mode so long it's forgotten how to operate any other way. Recovery isn't passive. It's active. It's deliberately creating the conditions your nervous system needs to de-escalate. It's rest when you feel like you should be doing something. It's stillness when everything in you wants to keep moving. It's giving your body permission to stand down even when your mind is still scanning for the next threat. Because if you don't build in recovery time, if you keep operating in threat mode from one crisis to the next, eventually your system stops being able to tell the difference between emergency and normal. And when everything feels like an emergency, nothing gets the response it actually requires. You're just activated all the time, running on empty, waiting for a break that never comes because you never let yourself take it.